This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people had so much to gain and had such a material motive for putting me in a position I'm in. We'll never let the true facts come about more to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader? Don't remember the name. You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
Now these people are in very high positions, yeah. Yes.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 60. I am your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, we got another little book report. And this is a book that I think has been on the list since the very beginning when we started this thing. And I've been pretty excited to finally delve into it and read it
I
cover
was
to
not
cover.
able to get a copy of this book, but this did bring me back to a book that I feel like I've mentioned, a publication of the somewhat sus publishing house, Feral House, I believe, called The Controllers, which is basically about like the MyLab theory of alien abduction, which kind of mentions this case incidentally, or like the military psyop take on alien abductions, and there's a whole chapter on this case that we're going to talk about today. So it was an interesting route back to that book.
Yeah, and
has some good material on it, honestly.
Yeah, and I think what makes this such a good topic to explore for us is it's really kind of a foundational narrative in the sort of legacy of other narratives that we brought up around the various MK Ultra programs and the alleged Project Monarch and things like that, things that came up during Michael Aquino's public inquisition in the 1980s and have come up kind of reverberated throughout conspiracy culture for the last few decades. And we've mentioned people like Kathy O'Brien before, who wrote Transformation of America, and Bryce Taylor, who wrote Thanks for the Memories. But before those books came out in the 90s, there was one that caused quite a splash, and that is The CIA's Control of Candy Jones by Donald Bain, which I believe came out in 1975, I want to say. 76, my bad. Came out in 1976.
The story of Candy Jones, too, had circulated well before that. I think that even before people knew about MK Ultra, any stuff like that, back when people knew about the idea of the Manchurian Candidate, obviously, and stuff like that, the idea that there could be brainwashing obviously was a thing when this was going on, but it wasn't really disclosed or publicly acknowledged that the CIA had experimented with the stuff during the time that it was circulating.
Yes.
It became a thing on the radio and stuff, so.
And it did
an early case of this.
It maybe is the earliest case where something was publicized kind of far and wide that the CIA engaged in this, and it was really it was some real synchronistic timing for this book to come out, because basically within a year or two, it's even kind of the investigations that were going on into CIA abuses in the mid-1970s, like the try not to laugh, but the Rockefeller Commission about CIA abuses. I'm sure they got everything. I'm sure they turned over every rock.
Definitely.
Yeah, every Rockefeller, but
every
then of
Roman
course
Atlantis,
the slightly, exactly, the Atlanteans covering their tracks, but also there was the somewhat more formidable church and pike committees in Congress that for the first time actually did expose the existence of the program MK Ultra, which Richard Helms, when he was CIA director, I believe back in 1973 during Watergate, had what he thought were all of the documents destroyed relating to that project. But I guess a certain number of expense reports were misfiled in the wrong cabinet, and somebody eventually found them. And so that was the first hard evidence that the CIA had in fact engaged in mind control experiments on Americans, often unwittingly, and on various types of Americans, everything from soldiers to prisoners to mental patients, and if this story is to be believed, even relatively famous professional models.
Yes.
Right?
So I think this is the first in a lot of ways, where it's also kind of like the first kind of like beta sex kitten like monarch mind control situation, because she was like a pinup girl, like one of the biggest pinup girls in America, who we're talking about, Candy Jones,
during World War II.
So it was kind of a forerunner of the whole like Ariana Grande is like triggered by butterflies to like, I don't know, service whatever, like reptilians and
the Satanists who run the music industry, the satanic Freemasons who control the record labels, etc. Exactly. I got so many Vigilant Citizen vibes while I was reading this book. It really was the first of its kind.
Yeah, the whole thing with like altars, like Billie Eilish, etc., like Cardi B or whatever, they all have altars, like this.
Yeah, they put a wig on, or Beyonce turns into Sasha Fierce. Nicki Minaj turns into Roman Zelensky when they go on stage. They even, maybe we'll get into it a little bit later, but the way that a lot of people talk about how when they go on stage and perform, that they enter almost a kind of hypnotic trance state where they're able to just perform at the absolute highest level, and singing and dancing, and it's like an out-of-body experience. It kind of makes you just wonder a little bit, because I think as is very very astutely outlined in this book, that the methods by which a doctor might hypnotize you could take on a variety of different dimensions, as we talked about in our Estabrooks and Erickson episode, and I believe Estabrooks definitely comes up in this book. So there are a number of ways to basically induce hypnosis in somebody that are basically, as Estabrooks described, like it is absolutely possible to hypnotize somebody without their consent. And so that is basically what happened to Candy Jones. And you could imagine all kinds of things with all these NLP, New Agey practitioners, and doctors to the stars, and people that might work for a record label or something along those lines. You could imagine like A Million Ways to Sunday, in which a star who maybe is suffering from quite understandably maybe from pressure or anxiety or stress or exhaustion. Hey, you know what? There's this really great technique. Have you ever tried hypnotherapy? And then, I'm not saying that like that's how like Sasha Fierce was like constructed, but it's a little bit easier than I think most people would think. Right? I mean, not everybody can be hypnotized. I should also preface that this book reiterates what Estabrooks said in his book, that people exist on a spectrum of kind of hypnotic suggestibility, and probably maybe 1 in 4 people are capable reasonably of being hypnotized, but then maybe there's 1 in 10 people who are hyper suggestible, and then there's maybe 1 in 20 people that are like the creme de la creme, and those are the types of people that hold on one second. The guy's like literally just trolling outside of my door right now. He's sitting outside of my window, like blaring it. It probably will show up. Okay, he went away. All right, sorry.
All right. The Estabrooks would say there's like a 1 in 4 people thing. Erickson, who was someone who Estabrooks really admired and who was generally just a larger figure in the hypnosis world, would say that anyone could be hypnotized, although there's a range of different takes on, what is possible with hypnosis. But in terms of the dissociation of the personality, the whole Manchurian Candidate thing, which is basically what this case deals with, is something like that, where it is presumably like a kind of sleeper agent, alter persona, that, like, definitely there are certain people who would be more susceptible to that, because there are people who already, like, have DID, or who already are prone to dissociating. So in that respect, like, it would be natural that certain people would be, if you were going to attempt that, you would have like you would have a greater interest in someone who already had some dissociative qualities. Which people who like are in a way, like, especially like the world of like Hollywood or like fame, stuff like that, it can be conditioning in and of itself, and it attracts certain people who like might be needy in certain ways, so
sure. It makes you think about child actors as well, going on, like the pressures that, or the sort of socialization they receive, and the pressures they have to sort of deal with when they're children, trains them at a very young age to, and think about it, as a child actor, you kind of have to like switch into an alter to do your job. And so you could see maybe how, even just in like acting exercises, it makes me think of that scene from Body Double, the De Palma movie, that is basically a version of like Synanon attack therapy, but in the context of an acting class, and he's trying to highlight how inherently like psychologically abusive even just acting training can be in Hollywood. So if you think about that applied to a child,
that like Richard Schechner used in Dionysus 69, which he actually would have witnessed. But according to Candy Jones, she got into this because she was an old USO colleague who, of course, was like a retired general, right?
General Sims is the alias. I haven't been able to track down exactly who he is yet, but
but he first got her involved in some courier type work, and then he sent her to go deliver a letter to Oakland, California, because she had business in the area anyway, so she was going. And then,
because of course the East Bay is involved in this story. I actually didn't know that Oakland played such a prominent role. It's like, of course, here we are again, like back in the East Bay, like we can't escape it every episode.
And that was like kind of a pivotal event, because when she was delivering this letter to Oakland, it turned out that the guy who the letter was addressed to and who she delivered it to was this guy who Donald Bain in the book gives the alias Dr. Jensen. We don't know for sure who he is, but we do know that he had actually treated her previously when she was in the USO, like in 1945. She got sick in the Philippines, and she was treated by this guy. And then, later on in the 60s, when, like in 1960 itself, I think, 1960, when she was delivering this letter, it's the same guy. And then he's like, oh, hey, like, would you, like, her modeling school, I guess, at the time was kind of faltering. That's what she was doing when she was, like, at a modeling academy. And I guess it wasn't really making a ton of money. So they're like, we'll give you a bunch of money if you go along with our other stuff. And one of those things was being, like, a hypnotic subject, according to her story.
Though she was not aware of that consciously, her main personality, Candy, was not aware of the hypnotizing aspect of it. She thought that she was just being used as a courier. Like, basically.
After the fact, of course, she didn't. Well, the whole idea was that, like, maybe at the time she agreed, but
well, actually, no. In the book, like, she,
after the fact,
I mean, the way, the way
way
she describes it is that basically she, and I guess this is common with highly suggestible people that are susceptible to hypnosis, where they insist that there's no way you could hypnotize me. And what, in this case, this doctor, Dr. Jensen, an alias, said was, okay, and then he went on this kind of monologue about the evils of abusing hypnotism, and how it had some very beneficial medical uses, but unfortunately, these particularly stage magicians and hypnotists were really abusing this, amazing kind of natural, technique or whatever for, parlor tricks and to make people do stupid things, and was really sullying the name of the whole thing. And really, you should avoid them, Candy, and not, never go to anybody like that and let them try to hypnotize you. And then he just kind of casually goes, well, actually, do you want me to show you how they do it? Because, you can't be hypnotized, but let me just show you. And she goes, oh, okay. And then he basically hypnotizes her under the pretense of showing her how one hypnotizes people. You know what I mean? So it was a kind of thing where, and then she had no recollection of that actually happening until she did a kind of hypnotic regression therapy with her husband later. So, I mean, just to set the stage for how this book came about before we dive into the content, just real quick, an overview of who Candy Jones was. She grew up in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. She had her father left the family. She had a very kind of abusive and controlling mother and a kind of grandmother who she loved very much, but who died. And she had a lot of lonely, psychologically abusive kind of situations going on in her home when she grew up, which is going to be very important later. But anyways, she ended up moving to Atlantic City, and then she entered and won the Miss Atlantic City competition when she was a teenager, and I guess got some attention after that, or some encouragement from people to try out modeling. So she went to New York and basically signed with a modeling agency. Eventually ended up at the agency of a big titan in that era, a guy named Harry Conover. And this guy was interesting. They mention it just slightly in passing in the book, but this guy was ran basically one of the top modeling agencies, in New York, in the country. And she would eventually marry him after World War II in 1946, and it was disastrous. But he was the originator of the concept of a cover girl. And this is very bizarre, but with in 1946, or I'm sorry, not in 46, but earlier, with a matching investment of $500 from a young male model who was also his roommate, Gerald Ford, currently the president of the United States, he's writing in 1976, Conover had formed the nation's most prestigious modeling agency. And so I guess, I don't know, first of all, I forgot that Gerald Ford was a male model. He was also a star college football player, but he was the co-investor and founder of this super powerful modeling agency. Very weird when you consider that Gerald Ford, there's a lot. I mean, he was put on the Warren Commission. There are some stories that he was even in Dallas at a party at Clint Murchison's house the night before the JFK assassination. He almost got killed himself by Squeaky Fromm, who's a member of the Manson family, possibly a hypnotized assassin, and another woman who Sarah Good, I want to say, who had connections to the Symbionese Liberation Army and the Getty family, the Hearst family. So very weird there. And that also when, the brother of the reincarnated pharaoh of Atlantis, Nelson Rockefeller, was vice president and would have become president if Gerald Ford, bit the bullet. But I guess he got lucky. So that's already kind of okay. And so,
I believe Lawrence Rockefeller was the pharaoh of Atlantis.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Nelson was the brother of the pharaoh.
He was probably in the Atlantis royal family. Yeah, he was still in the royal family.
Yeah, he was a prince. He was an Atlantean prince.
Yeah.
Right. And so people always forget the Rockefellers wormed their way after Watergate into being the vice president, and then two different women tried to kill the president, and then if Nelson Rockefeller hadn't died of a heart attack. I remember the rumor being that it was while he was having sex, he died of a heart attack in the late 70s. But if he'd taken that adrenochrome like David Rockefeller did, he might have been around a little longer. But anyways, so yeah, there's already weird some weird things there. But anyways, it doesn't seem like she had a pretty good ride starting out as a model. I mean, I think she was 16 and she went into Conover's office, and he was a photographer kind of looked at her. She was 16 at the time, and Conover invited her in and then stared at her for a minute, And then he said, Candy Johnson, I think. And she was like, what? And he was like, that's your name, Candy Johnson. Yeah, all right. And then, like, he just gave her like, stage name right there. But then I guess she kept forgetting it, so she kept missaying it as Candy Jones. And eventually he just said, why don't you just be Candy Jones? And I guess he really, like, went all in on the candy concept. Like, he would always dress her up in, like, candy patterned, like, bathing suits. And, I mean, yeah, you know, okay, but yeah, whatever. Maybe it was innocent.
Oh, by the way, it was Sarah Moore who tried to kill.
Yes, Sarah Moore. That's
Sarah,
what it was.
Sarah Moore. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So very bizarre. But so Conover, you know, he starts putting her out, and she starts booking, you know, modeling jobs and stuff. And I guess her controlling mother kind of really hated this. She wanted Candy Jones to go to secretarial school, but, you know, Candy Jones was very good at this. So then World War II breaks out. She's already like an up-and-coming model, and she becomes a USO girl, basically, traveling around to different theaters, and particularly the South Pacific, and putting on shows and just, you know, doing performances and stuff, and has a real, I guess, overall, like, this is a real whirlwind kind of experience, and she's very invested in kind of the war effort and feels very patriotic. So she's working for the USO, and I thought this is interesting. So she ends up in the Philippines in 1945 when General MacArthur had, you know, liberated the island, or, you know, recaptured it for the U.S. imperialists. And she was, you know, doing shows there. And then she came down with, what was it, like undulant fever or something like that. And then malaria on top of that, and got really, really sick. She noted that later on that there were, quote, special services officers that wrote reports on all of their USO performances and, like, sent them back to, like, headquarters. And she joked that there were, like, you know, basically theater critics in khakis writing these, like, meticulous reports about, you know, and said that it was like a pressure, but like a good pressure, a good kind of pressure to be at the top of your game and stuff like that, because they were, you know, writing, shouldn't say what kind of special services, whether that was the OSS, it might have been, because you probably have a bunch of, you know, Ivy League, like, dandies, like, that's the job I want to review the USO show with the pretty girls, you know, or something like that. But she just calls them special service officers. But then she gets really sick and basically ends up in the hospital. And I guess her special services officer, her kind of handler, Bill Talman, checked her into a Philippines hospital, for undulant fever and malaria. And then when she was in the hospital, she caught jungle rot from the sheets that she had, and her hair started falling out, and her face was discolored. And this is very distressing for her, obviously, as like a young, beautiful model, that all these things are happening. So she was stuck in this hospital in the Philippines for a while. But while she was there, she met an army medic. I don't know if he was a doctor at the time, but the alias we mentioned before, Dr. Gilbert Jensen. And she met him in the hospital, and I guess he gave her his contact information to, like, keep in touch, you know, once they were both back in the States and whatnot. And she also got to know around that time in general in the Philippines, she got to know an army officer who later would become a general, who has the alias of General Sims. And I've not been able to figure out the identity of this general, but he kind of struck up a kind of friendship with her, and eventually she recovered, and it seemed like everything was okay, and she went back to New York after the war, and then she ended up marrying Harry Conover, the head of the modeling agency. But unfortunately, she quickly discovered that he was bisexual and not very sexually interested in her. She recalled that I think somebody asked her when they consummated her relationship.
He was gay.
Actually, yes and no. But he really was just kind of all over the place, I guess, she was asked, when did you consummate your marriage? They were married on July 4th, 1946, and she said, sometime between the wedding day and Christmas. And I guess he told her on the wedding night, look, like, I don't want to...
He would only have sex with her when he was drunk, right? That's
yeah,
what I had read
and he said, look, like, I don't want to get too tied down and everything, like, on their wedding night. And basically was like, later on, he told her, quote, "Your large bosom disgusts me." Because he, to the extent that he liked women, he liked more kind of waifish, kind of, skinny women. And so that quickly started being an unhappy marriage. But, she was also able to get into like the world of business, and she started kind of her own modeling management company. She wrote a number of books on kind of how-to books on the modeling industry, and she signed a lot of accounts to like provide models for. But I guess Conover insisted for prestige regions that, like, even if she got the clients, that they be like billed through his agency and all that kind of stuff. And eventually, I think it was around, they ended up, I think they had 3 kids and were, on the outside living a pretty good life. But then I think it was around 1950, like in the very late 50s, Conover like wigs out and disappears for like a month or two. And doesn't tell Candy Jones where he's going. She eventually finds out that he has gone, and I guess, I don't know, he left New York for a while and then went and rented a suite at the Plaza Hotel and was just like camping out there and like hiding from her. And she did say that she discovered that while he was there, he was throwing like raucous parties and kind of like almost like kind of orgy parties. Sounds very Epstein, basically. And she found out that he was actually messing around with 2 teenage models who Candy represented at her agency and had like helped, start their careers and stuff. And basically he was like, doing some Epstein stuff with them. And so that was like a huge blow that was very like upsetting to her. Also, he withdrew all of their money from their joint bank accounts and then blew it all. And so then like they were completely bankrupt, and he basically financially ruined them, and then they got divorced. And she was being chased by all these debtors that were trying to, I guess the way they set up their business, it really bit her in a bad way. And her modeling agency was not profitable, even though it was prestigious. And, that all led up to like 1960, where she's still at her modeling agency, but things were difficult. Her 3 boys were in private school. She had trouble paying for it. And was kind of, at the end of her rope a little bit. And I guess there was a former heavyweight boxing champion named Gene Tunney who happened to rent out the office just across the hall from her modeling agency. And one day she saw a woman who appeared to be a cleaning lady kind of jiggling around with the lock late at night after he had left, and then like finding the right key and going in there. And she thought it was a little odd, but then the next day they found out that his office had been burgled. And so then a couple weeks later, like a young guy and a woman also showed up, and she kind of caught them, and they were like, oh, we were just looking for Mr. Tunney, and like ran off. So there's like some weird things. And then one day an FBI agent comes in and starts chatting her up, and he kind of mentions that he's there to look into the Gene Tunney thing, but then he notices the like hypersensitive kind of hidden microphones that she has, which I guess she had bought from the Candid camera. I guess it used to be Candid Radio or something before it was Candid Camera, but the guy who created it had these, hidden microphones to, pull pranks on people and stuff. And she had bought these off of him, and he noticed them and says, hey, those are some pretty interesting microphones. I'm actually like staking out a place on 57th Street right now. Do you think I could borrow one for a few months? And she was like, okay, yeah, I guess so. And she thought it was like a little weird that an FBI guy wanted to borrow her mic, but he did. And then he came back and broached this idea of like, hey, do you think it would be okay if I sent some mail to your office and then once a month somebody would come by to pick it up? It would be just, doing your patriotic duty, not really a big deal. We just need people that we can send things through. And I guess, he might have offered money at that point, which she desperately kind of needed. And she was still a very patriotic, trusting American. So she said, yeah, why not? Then after that, one day she's walking into her building and she bumps into who else? General Sims from the South Pacific, from the war. This guy she used to know. And so General Sims, they start chatting, and he happened to be grabbing lunch with Gene Tunney, the heavyweight boxer. And I guess, she thought it was a little weird to like run into him in this context, but I don't know. It's a small world. But then a few days later, she's visited by this FBI agent named Ted. And actually, I'm sorry. She ran into General Sims before the FBI guy showed up. So there's this weird burglary stuff. Sorry, 1 second. We're going to hold for this. All right. Okay. I'm just going to take that from the top. Okay. So the Gene Tunney's office is mysteriously burgled. And then she runs into General Sims outside of her building, who just happens to be getting lunch with Gene Tunney, and they chat. And then a few days later, this FBI agent who introduced himself as Ted shows up. He asks to borrow her microphone and then asks, can we send things through your office? And not long after that, he asks her, when she's going to be on a trip, I think it was to judge a beauty competition in San Francisco, he asks her if she would deliver a letter to a doctor in Oakland. And I believe when she gets there, she realizes that, oh, this is Dr. Gilbert Jensen, the medic who treated me in the hospital in the Philippines. How funny. And, by her initial recollection, all she did was drop off this letter to him and then go back to New York. But as was found out later, there's a lot more going on. So anyways, that was all like 1960, 61. So this kind of thing apparently went on for about 12 years until I think like 1972, roughly. And the real turning point for her, and this is a real like crux of the book, this is kind of why we have the book, is she met this very eccentric New York City late night radio host named Long John Nebel. And
he was kind of like the original like Art Bell. Like his show was like this sort of forebear of like Coast to Coast and that type of style. It was like an overnight show, and it was really about like these types of subjects, like UFOs, like the Shaver mystery, stuff like that.
I would go a bold step further
on conspiracy stuff involving
the CIA.
Yeah,
I would even go further and say that he is like perhaps, I haven't listened to him, but he sounds like a spiritual forefather of subliminal jihad itself in a way. But obviously everything that came in between, he was a real pioneer. I mean, everything probably from Alex Jones to Coast to Coast, and a lot more like KPFA type stuff as well. And I think he occupied the midnight to 6 a.m. time slot. And he would do that's really what made me think subliminal jihad, because this dude would do 6-hour shows 5 days a week. I mean, even we couldn't reach that level of Stakhanovism. That is pretty impressive. And so they met and just like totally like hit it off, and I think they got engaged after maybe like a month and a half, and they really clicked. And I guess all of Long John Nebel's friends like loved Candy Jones and just thought she was like so cool, and not they said not like a typical model, and just like a delightful person, and had this kind of even a little bit of awkwardness, and was very disarming. And people comment her on her beauty, she'd just say, "Oh, well, I have good bones." Was a little embarrassed, and like it all seemed to be good. But then Long John Nebel noticed, and I think the first time he noticed it was on their wedding night, that Candy Jones kind of she seemed to sort of switch into a very different mood and even kind of personality for like brief moments, and was a very different person than the Candy that he knew and had fallen in love with, who was very sweet and kind of chill and all this stuff. This woman was curt and like kind of sneering and like hostile and like kind of thing. But I think it was just like a brief kind of moment of like she said she came out of the bathroom and said a thing or two to him that just really caught him off guard. And he started noticing this in the first months of their marriage, that it would happen kind of, semi-regularly and kind of just out of nowhere. And she would never remember acting this way. She would have kind of complete amnesia about it. And I guess she started to join him as a co-host on his show. So she was staying up from midnight to 6 a.m. and I guess started to develop kind of insomnia and trouble sleeping. And would also, as kind of a maybe, I think staying up all night might have exacerbated this or whatever, but she started to have, more and more of these like little kind of outbursts and stuff. And Long John Nebel was getting concerned. So I guess he had read a book or something about hypnotism that had just come out. I think there was a famous book called Hypnotism, Is It For You? And I think he kind of thought it would be interesting to take it upon himself. There was Lewis Wahlberg, Hypnosis, Is It For You? He thought it would be interesting to maybe see if he could try to do a kind of, hypnotherapy on Candy Jones to just help her fall asleep. And that was when he did it for the first time. And when he did it, basically this other personality, not only did this other personality start to emerge, but like memories from her childhood began to emerge, and all kinds of very interesting stuff that kind of got his attention. And so he realized right away that Candy Jones was highly suggestible. Like, I mean, he was not a professional hypnotist by any means. I guess he did a good enough job to get her in the state, but as Donald Bain, the author, kind of says, like, probably anybody that would have tried this on Candy Jones would have been able to succeed, because she is one of those creme de la creme, like 1 out of 20 people that has an incredible ability to fall into a hypnotic trance. And so he started doing that, and things started coming up, and she started hinting that really she had been living a kind of strange double life from like 1960 to the time when she met him. And that's when the first contours of this whole web start to emerge, right? I'm trying to see what page here. Maybe I can just read a little, because there's some good recreated transcripts in this book of the actual conversations. Donald Bain makes a very big effort to kind of set these things up and describe them as like they're not reproduced exactly verbatim. They're kind of compressed a little bit for kind of readability's sake, and also that this isn't a totally bulletproof process. It's very liminal, right? So right. It is possible that hallucinations can creep in to memories that are being recalled, but also he puts his foot down pretty strongly that recovering memories through hypnotic regression is a real thing and does work in a broad sense. It's not like a perfect science, but he's gonna, certainly in the case of Candy Jones, he feels like, I mean, there is corroborative evidence of some of the stuff she would say, so it's not like, but he also says that like in a criminal court, basically, as far as like law enforcement and the judicial system is concerned, they don't actually take and he kind of says maybe you shouldn't necessarily take hypnotically recovered memories as absolute gospel, but what they are is they can provide context and clues that can kind of tell you where to look to find things that can corroborate those stories. And he gives a few examples of criminal cases where the FBI used like hypnotic regression on some witnesses that I think it was a case where people were dying of poisoning in like a veterans hospital, and they were able to hypnotize some of the patients, and then they were able to remember something. They were able to remember like some of the nurses like spiking like injections with poison or something like that. Now, they couldn't go and arrest those nurses right away, but then they went and investigated them, and they were able to find evidence that, in fact, they had done it, and then those people were convicted. So it's that kind of thing where, you know, it can provide a very salient lead to a thing that really happened, and then if you're lucky, you maybe can corroborate it in the outside world, but you do always have to take it kind of like with a little grain of salt. But of course, we're not here to just Candy Jones.
Like we're some recent, you know, like or I remember recently hearing, I don't think it was a recent incident, about like someone who was sent to death row on the basis like kind of like forensic hypnosis evidence, like in the 70s. Really? Turned out to like not really be accurate. Yeah, I think that there definitely is, like, you know, the thing about like the whole like thing of like false memories. A lot of the time, the things that are dismissed as false memories are any memory of like being ritually abused or like manipulated by like the CIA or something like that, where people are just saying like, I remember this happening, and they're like, oh well, you know, that is something that I don't believe in, so that's a false memory. Like, that's not the same as like a memory being recovered under hypnosis, you know, that's like suppressed or something. Not to say that like this might not be real, but there definitely is that kind of, there's some weird things like around it, like the fact of who her husband was, you know, the fact of his existing interest in this. You know, one wonders at least, like, well, then was that like part of the op in some way that she married this guy, you know, who was like a conspiracy radio host sort of, or at least a sort of paranormal like esoterica radio host, you know, like and why, like, you know, but
that is an interesting thing to consider.
There were, you know, there are some things like, you know, for instance, in the book that I mentioned by Martin Cannon, The Controllers, you know, he mentions like some things that you're like, oh, well, maybe like, like I guess Candy Jones said to him in a telephone call, the CIA had like a file on her, but they wouldn't release it. But, you know, it's like, without seeing it or like hearing their like own denial of like an FOIA request or something like that, it's hard to like really, because there is always like that question, you know, of like what is, because they're like, even though the idea of the government actually doing this like was not widely accepted, like it definitely was like a fictional trope. But again, like, you know, like as you said, we want to explore the possibility, like, while, you know, leaving open the other potentialities like there, you know, maybe there's like other takes on this, like even more than just like the purely skeptical one or like the, you know, the official story.
Well, the purest skeptical one is that Dr. John Nebel and Candy Jones cooked up this story together kind of for his radio show to just be this big story. And, you know, I think that's assuming a lot of negative intent on like Candy Jones and Long John Nebel, and like not assuming negative intent on behalf of like the CIA. So I'm gonna personally throw that one out. I'm not sold on that at all. I think that whatever happened here was a genuine thing that Candy Jones experienced, and John Nebel, basically what he did once he realized that there was a kind of, this kind of state had been kind of like programmed into her, then he started recording the hypnotic sessions. So he had like hundreds of hours of audio tapes of his conversations with the hypnotized Candy / her alter ego, who was named Arlene Grant.
Right.
And I think the other thing about
name in real life was Arlene. Yeah, and
and that goes back all the
childhood friend. Yeah, like, or imaginary friend Arlene as a child. Yeah, because she had like a very abusive childhood, actually. Like the same way, like, you know, she would have these sort of stories of her like being, well, I guess we'll get into them later, but she would go through like these horrible experiences as part of her role as a CIA agent. You know, she also had like these types of horrible relationships with like authority figures and like these horrible abusive things going back to her parents, which probably has something to do with, you know, maybe she had dissociative personality disorder.
That's going to be really important in this whole narrative, because it's the confluence of two things that we've like discussed before, but I think maybe we haven't discussed them fully in tandem with each other. I mean, we did somewhat in the Estabrooks episode, which actually I think the same passages we read from that are in this book, but basically about how you could induce what was then called multiple personalities through hypnosis, and how basically we've definitely mentioned before the kind of I would say like probably the normative theory about DID and MPD is that it's a result of kind of extreme like psychological or physical or sexual trauma in young children, and how that it's a thing that develops out of like early childhood trauma. And so Candy Jones was in a way basically a perfectly primed candidate for this kind of, you know, hypnotic inculcation, because she had already developed, basically it seems pretty clear, she had developed DID organically as a result of the abusive relationship she had with her mother when she was a child. So she actually had a fully formed alter kind of in her psyche right off the bat when Dr. Jensen kind of met her and started doing the hypnosis. And then this book basically postulates that once he discovered that there was this altar that already existed, he kind of realized that was like the path of least resistance, and that was the easiest thing to do. It was a boon, really, that instead of constructing a whole alternate personality, he could use this one who was kind of the alpha dominant personality of Candy Jones by her own recollection. Like, Arlene was strong, she was confident, she was fearless, like she could run faster, she was stronger, she didn't take shit from anybody, you know, she was like cynical and you know, unflappable and all these things, whereas Candy felt like she was weak and she was vulnerable and scared all the time, but like when she had to, she could switch to Arlene. And she described it at one point that, like, I think John Nebel asks her, you know, do you not like Arlene? And she's like, oh no, like Arlene's gotten me out of so many jams in life. And at a certain point was like giving Arlene credit for everything she'd ever done that was like, you know, notable. Like Arlene had written all my books. Like Arlene was on stage, like in the performances, like Arlene was on Broadway, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And John Nebel was kind of tortured by like trying to like convince her that like, no, you did this, like it, like he wanted her to like feel confident in herself. But I guess that's the nature, at least in some cases with DID, where the personality is fragmented, it's not unified into a whole. And I think, you know, there's some interesting nuance in this book just about multiple personality disorder. And granted, this is the mid-70s, so I think there's been a lot of research and, you know, understanding of it later on, but it does air out kind of like some, you know, some areas of dispute in the field where, you know, I think one doctor kind of he sort of says that maybe perhaps it's kind of I don't know, it's a little bit of a misnomer to call something like multiple personality disorder. Like it's kind of a philosophical projection onto the patient of like us defining. He says, you know, in reality, all of us have to some extent a multiple versions of ourselves, but they're kind of more or less like integrated at the end of the day. The thing that makes DID or MPD kind of pathological and harmful is when the different sides are not the different alters are not integrated, and they're not like simultaneously aware of one another. They're kind of split. But he said even that is kind of liminal, and perhaps like they come to accept that they have multiple personalities, quote unquote, because the doctor is telling them they do. So really it's like you're assigning a name to a tendency in your personality, which happens to be more exaggerated than with kind of the average individual, but maybe it's still more diffuse and complex than just like switching to like the new person. But also these people tend to be some of the most highly suggestible people that have kind of natural, well, it's never like naturally occurring, but people that outside of any government program just ended up with DID from like childhood abuse. They, I guess, tend to be much more suggestible and hypnotizable than the average person. So, you know, so then if you tell them you have 17 personalities, like they bring up the Sybil case in this, the very famous one, at the time, who claimed to have 17 personalities, but they said, does she really have 17 personalities? Like, not necessarily literally, but this is a conceptual framework that has been projected onto it. And I think that was an interesting kind of go, because I do think there does seem to be something highly liminal about like DID that we maybe fully haven't cracked yet, or the scientific world, at least publicly, has not cracked yet. But I could also see if it almost doesn't matter, especially if you have some kind of secret government program that is going to inculcate in you the hypnotic suggestion that you have like 17 personalities, then that's probably what you're going to believe, and you'll probably act accordingly. That's kind of what it sounds like.
Well, I think like a lot of these things like are, language is always in some ways incomplete and inadequate to like phenomena. But like even beyond that, like I think that a lot of like mental illness stuff, and we talked about this before, like a lot of things like discourse around mental illness, like the taxonomies that we have for this are, in some ways like just tools and frameworks that can be helpful or like to doctors or like, can be useful to understanding like or dealing with or controlling phenomena, maybe people who suffer from them, or the people who treat them, or like the people who maybe want to do something else, and the same thing is true, I think, of like even of something like hypnosis. That's true, where it's like, are you going to like into a hypnotic state, like is there like a state, does the mind have such a thing as like a subconscious, things like that, how much these constructs really apply,
Bain does mention that a little bit. He does say that basically everybody has basically the capacity to slip into a hypnotic trance, and in fact I've read this elsewhere too in more like recent writing, that basically we all have the capacity to do it, and pretty much most of us do. And the kind of most obvious example of that is like daydreaming, when you kind of zone out and then you kind of lose track of time or something like that.
Right.
That is basically the same type of brain pattern activity that we're talking about. It's just a little bit more pronounced, and basically it can be guided by a controller, a hypnotist, and then they can suggest
like,
things
or when
to
you're
you.
hyper focused on something, when you're doing any kind of like meditation, like when you're I think that there's like, and I think that it's different, like depending on the situation, the context, and I also think that it changes based on the perceptions of hypnosis by the person. I think that people hypnotize themselves in a way with their attitudes about hypnosis, with their
No, Bain actually, he makes that exact point. I mean, he talks about how meditation is basically a form of self-hypnosis. So like, if you do TM, you can just psyop yourself into all kinds of things. I mean, and he talks about like the amazing ability of the body in a lot of these experiments that people did with hypnosis that would seem to defy what we know about human biology and our central nervous system and how we experience pain. I mean, they talked about how in age regression therapy or age regression experiments, in one case, he believes it's real. Donald Bain believes that it's pretty much like this is a provable thing, though it's not exact. It's not an exact science. So if you regress somebody to age 5, they might kind of talk like a 7-year-old, like how they were when they were 7. But that doesn't mean the phenomenon is fake. But he says that like in one case they had a subject who was
pretending.
They're not pretending. Yeah, exactly. But
and
he said,
in a situation where someone is hypnotized to do something, and they're like, "Oh, well, I was pretending to be hypnotized." After the fact, they're like, "Oh, I was pretending." Well, but if they did what they were hypnotized to do and went along with the instructions of the hypnotist, then like,
what's the difference?
Really is the difference? So,
exactly. And that Candy Jones also did say that repeatedly to both Dr. Jensen and Long John Nebel, that she had a very difficult time accepting that John Nebel was even hypnotizing her. She thought she was asleep.
Right.
And so he'd play back these tapes for her, and she'd be kind of like horrified. But Bain said that she could not philosophically accept that basically she was turning into this person, Arlene Grant, and recalling these memories and all these other things. It just seemed like ridiculous to her. And I guess that's like a common trait. Like the more hypnotizable you are, the more insistent that you can't be. So I guess everybody, should watch out. If you think you can't get, I wish there was like a test you could take, like just, I would just like to know. I don't think I'm very hypnotizable. I don't know.
My personal opinion is that everyone can be hypnotized, but I think that it requires like a framing where like you'll kind of accept it. I don't think that like, you can definitely be conditioned like over time against your will when someone's trying to condition you and like break down your will and human spirit. Like, lots of people can be conditioned in that way. In terms of like hypnosis, like in the, Erickson sense, like, I think anyone can be hypnotized, but like finesse has to be used, like, and it's not something that if you're like fighting it, someone can't wave a pocket watch in your face and like make you become hypnotized. Like there has to be some kind of like,
No, for sure. Which is why Dr. Jensen used I guess this is the tried and true technique of like, let me show you how hypnotists do it, so I can show you how dangerous it is and how you should never trust them. And then, as long as you get somebody to say yes to participating in it, in whatever you're doing. And they even say that the kind of, the sort of undulating clock or the spiral, anything like that, that's all kind of like a bag of like tricks. And basically the only thing that's important about that is focusing the eyes on a very particular point. And so you could do that with just like stare at that picture on the wall, or close your eyes. Or
something.
Closing your eyes works like pretty much just as well. But they also said that for some people, especially those who are very skeptical about the efficacy of hypnosis, that using those things like a swinging stopwatch or something like that, or a pocket watch, actually does help. Because it helps them buy into like the ritual of what they're doing, and then they're able to. So there's a lot of things of like, I don't want to go too hard in like the mind over matter, but it is fascinating like what the human body is able to kind of endure or do to itself under hypnosis. I just want to read like one or two examples here, like that Bain lists. He talked about how in one of these hypnosis experiments, they had an epileptic patient, and when regressed to an age prior to his first seizure, an electroencephalograph recorded his brain patterns as normal. When progressed to an age after the onset of epilepsy, the readings became abnormal. So like that's weird, right? That's not supposed to be a thing that happens. You can't trick yourself into not having epilepsy anymore, right? And he talked about.
I don't know, like it's what, maybe.
Well, exactly.
Like, I mean, epilepsy is a mental illness, right? Like it's a phenomenon of the mind, so I don't see why, like, it wouldn't be. Possible,
Well, I mean, a lot is not even like fully understood about. Kind of it's still a mysterious kind of illness. It has to do with like electrical neuron firings like between the two hemispheres.
Like machine were they using in the 70s? I mean, there's all sorts of stuff, but like I don't.
Sure. I mean, the electroencephalograph is kind of. But they also talked about things that I've seen mentioned in all kinds of different. I don't know, books and YouTube videos and things like that, where like pain resistance is incredibly, like he mentions one experiment where they would basically take an electric wire, and then they would get like a saltwater patch and put it on somebody's hand and then attach the wire to it, and because it's wet, just a tiny little level of voltage, like 15 or 20 volts, is absolutely painful and unbearable. And a normal person would like never be able to do it. But if you hypnotize somebody in such a way that they believe it's not real, you can shock them and they won't even flinch. And in the same way, you could take somebody and hypnotize them and connect them to like an electroshock, compulsive electroconvulsive therapy thing. and it can be not actually connected to electricity, but I guess maybe as long as like the buzzing sound is there and they're going like clear or whatever, the people will tense up and react like they're getting electroshocked in exactly the way that they would but they're not. They're just not getting electroshocked.
I don't think you need to, like, I feel like that's something where it's borderline. You almost wouldn't need to hypnotize someone to get the latter reaction.
You're right. That placebo effect.
Yeah,
well, I mean, even the placebo effect is like a kind of an example that everybody, is applicable to more people. That you can.
Yeah, or if you tell someone like that same thing you're saying about if you tell someone they have a split personality, if you tell someone that they're smart versus if you tell someone they're stupid, that's like conditioning over time. It's exactly.
And it made me think of like all the other stories, and not to go too far down that rabbit hole like right now, but just in general, like the hypothesis that kept popping into my head over this book was like, if there was a Monarch program, if there was a successor to whatever Candy Jones was involved in, say in the 1980s, or even more recent than that. Like, how central was hypnosis to basically doing that? Because I think there's one way to read like the Fritz Springmeier version of like the Illuminati handbook to create the ultimate undetectable mind control sex slave, etc. That in the more really gory, harrowing, evil versions of this, which have popped up in like the Franklin scandal and Aquino and Kathy O'Brien. It's all about like deliberately inflicting severe trauma on small children, right?
Yeah.
That seems to be kind of the dark truth of like, why would they be abusing children in this way if perhaps they're trying to induce DID on them? And I mean, I'm definitely not like, I'm not throwing out that possibility, because I think that the people involved in this type of stuff are capable of that.
Even in the Kathy O'Brien stuff, a lot of time it's just like straight up blackmail and threats almost, it seems like. Kathy O'Brien has like programming kind of, but a lot of the stories, it just seems like she does what they say because she'll be killed if she doesn't. It almost, but which, I mean, if you want to take it down to a more mundane level, which like think about the relationship of like, I think we mentioned this recently, of like a street pimp, like the psychology of a street pimp. Or Epstein and like his sex slaves, something like that.
Yeah, though I think with Epstein, maybe there was like, I mean, none of the stories that have kind of come out in the mainstream press hint at him doing anything more than classic pimp sex trafficker kind of tactics on people. Basically a combination of threatening them, inducing them with like lots of gifts or financial benefits, and then like using a lot of psychological manipulation, basically, which is kind of a classic pimp thing. So it's like, if they're able to do that, and maybe putting aside Epstein, because like he might have had all these like weird kind of intelligence, he could have been doing with all of this science eugenics shit, like he might have had some tools at his disposal, let's say. But let's just take your average pimp like on the street or whatever, kind of doing that's a very tried and true kind of organic technology or set of strategies to manipulate people. Doesn't necessarily involve hypnosis with a capital H, but it does involve a kind of conditioning and a kind of a mix of coercion and like seduction and all those same kind of dynamics. So you could see like, would they have to, and then also throw in this idea of, and I mean, there's even aspects with the pimps where obviously there's legal reasons why they do this, but don't they always they give these girls a new name, right?
Yeah, a lot of the time.
Like you're Destiny now, you're Candy, like
like flowers and candy, and then like the extreme, and you like can get like that sort of like triggered like reaction, of like fear, like if someone like routinely hurts you, and it does create like a certain kind of Stockholm syndrome, I think, like in people who are abused. I mean, this is like an abusive dynamic that you see all the time, where like why doesn't she leave, is the question that people always ask. And there's obviously many answers to that question, and one of them is that there's an aspect of manipulation that happens, a certain dependency that is like built up over time through these techniques that, or through these like patterns of behavior or like a relation that people like, it's not like people who are abusing like their girlfriends or their wives have like studied like this, it's just,
yeah, exactly.
Like
this flows quite naturally out of an abusive personality, basically, or it's, in a way, I mean, it's complex, but it's something that it seems like people are just able to like innately tap into if their minds are
or
kind
like
of
being, I mean, this is like if you think of it as actually being like training someone, if you have like the object in mind of like training someone for a job, whether it's like to be a prostitute like in your employ, or to be like a courier or something, for your intelligence operation, or like an assassin, let's say, that's kind if you think about the way people train animals, like Pavlov's dogs, you can treat dogs cruelly, and like you can use like a punishment like military system, and like that works, but there's also like and people kind of like intuitively know how to do that. It's one of like the first inventions of humanity in a way, is the domestication of animals, which are much more trainable than human beings.
It's always been the holy grail, right? Like they people like psychopaths in positions of power would love for us to be some kind of livestock or dog or something like that would just like uncomplicatedly like follow them. And I mean, even when you think about like the lexicon of pimps, like the idea of turning a trick is like that. I feel like that must come from kind of getting a dog to do a trick.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, something like that. So it is kind of this. There's this inherent like Pavlovian logic at the heart of it that is kind of has been with us for a very long time. So in a way, it's like, I think a lot of those things might be operating in the mix. And then if you throw hypnosis in there, it just gives you an even more powerful tool to like completely. I mean, I guess, if somebody, say, is, a sex worker who has a pimp, even if they do have a kind of like Stockholm syndrome kind of relationship, it's conceivable maybe that you say if you arrested them and you threatened them with a lot of jail time if they didn't give up the pimp and, give over evidence that would get him arrested. Maybe a lot of them, even if they were devoted to him, maybe they would, like, it's very complicated. It depends, right? But maybe a lot of them could, if you pressured them enough, like they could do that. But I guess the benefit, according to these CIA doctors that Candy Jones was involved with, would be that she wouldn't even be able to tell you any incriminating information because she would have picked it all up in a different hypnotic state. And the current state that she's in, which would be, she wouldn't be, even if they tortured her, she wouldn't be able to tell them anything of value. And that was like the real holy grail for these scientists. And we have to assume probably the leadership of the CIA who are signing off on all this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, well, you don't really know, like, the information that we have about Project Monarch is so scant, like, there's no, like, official information about it, really, so it's all just, like, from various stories, that, so, but it's something like that, insofar as that has a relationship to the actual, like, experiments that the CIA and other intelligence agencies did with the control of the mind, like, again, kind of like we said in our hypnosis episode, recently, our hypnosis episode with Estabrooks and Erickson, the idea like of hypnosis is kind of like, an organizing concept around like control of the mind, and that's something like the techniques of it or the sort of repertoire of concepts associated with it. Like we know that those are things that like were experimented with, as well as like other stuff, other kinds of subliminal suggestion or like conditioning,
NLP,
anything like that, So I'm sure that like if there's an extension of this that goes into of MK Ultra, for instance, that goes into other mind control, or it develops on that pattern. Again, like it's hard to say what you're talking about. We're talking about Project Monarch, like because if you're speculating, you could just go to what some of the alleged Monarch whistleblowers say, and like they give a pretty good rundown on like what the nature of it was, but there's discrepancies between them, and there but
And I think sometimes it's a little bit like talking about MK Ultra, where you're really using it as a catch-all umbrella term. You know, sometimes, I mean, for example, like, who knows? Maybe this program was technically part of MK Search or MK Often, because those were some of the successor programs in the 1960s. But we can call it MK Ultra. Same with Project Monarch, because we don't know exactly. There's been intimations that such a program with that name actually existed, but we don't know how. And this book even, it gives a little bit of rope to, like, the skeptics, you know, if they want to basically not fully indict the CIA for just being totally involved in this. Like, Donald Bain at least entertains the idea of, like, well, what if Dr. Jensen kind of started out doing this as a very, like, low-key CIA research project, but then he kind of was a mad scientist who, like, went further with it, even without the CIA knowing about it. I don't even think he's convinced of that idea, but, you know, he throws it out there as, like, a possibility that maybe. But I'm more of the mind that especially when you look at who these guys, how prominent these guys were, and the people that they socialized with and all that, I think that whatever they were doing was a part of the whole web. I don't think they were going rogue at all. So yeah.
I just want you boys to see what you're fighting for, that's all.
Hello. I suppose some of you are wondering what I'm doing here. Well, you see, some of you fellows have written to me and requested a real good pinup picture of me in nothing but a bathing suit. So, here I am. Oh, I have a lot of other bathing suits at home, but the photographer told me you would like this one the best. Because I'm a pin-up girl. That's what they name me. I'm the kid who loves you all. Don't be shy. Come on and frame me. Stick me in your locker or against the wall. Pin-up girl. You've all embraced me. I'm your dream, your gay mirage. Many eyes have sweetly faced me. I am yours for tax or pins or mucilage. At night while you count sheep, I'm watching o'er your bed from above. And while you're fast asleep, baby, I know what you're dreaming of. Your pin-up girl. My clothes are daring. They're not much, I must confess. But I swear I'll go on wearing less and less for my pin-up dress. If it will bring you happiness, all my charms for you unfurl. I'm your little pin-up girl.
So I think maybe we should talk about, like, what happened once she got inducted into this program with Dr. Gilbert Jensen, and also the bringing to the surface of Arlene Grant, her alter ego, which Long John Nebel did not exactly, he was not aware of at first. He just thought it was like a different side of her personality, but he quickly realized that at first he thought it was just her imaginary friend coming back, but then he realized that basically, I'll just read this little part right here. This the spotty acquaintance with his wife's history would be forced into perspective during the spring of 1973 by the emergence of another person into the world of Candy and John Nebel. No specific date can be attached to the first appearance of this new entity because no record was made, and because it happened so fast and unexpectedly that Nebel had all he could do to cope with the difficulties of the moment. Also, it took a while for him to recognize that he was, in fact, dealing with another distinct personality, because when she first appeared, he assumed it was just another of Candy's peculiar changes of mood. It was that voice, that alien, icy, antagonistic voice, a rusty knife that severed the calm of the apartment. Quote, what made me first realize that this was different from past episodes was that, this is capitalized, the voice came at me and stayed around, says Nebel. Before, it was only a comment, a look, and a few seconds of bitchiness. But when I was first faced with having to deal with it, it was like another woman had slipped into the apartment and wanted to take me on, like a guest on the show who has a chip on her shoulder. Nebel's first brush with the other woman during a hypnotic session occurred sometime in early June 1973, before he installed the tape equipment in the bedroom, and he describes it from memory. I asked her where she was. She told me she was in my office. I said I knew that, and she didn't have to tell me she was in my office. Then I asked who I was. She answered me in that snotty voice I'd heard before, that if I didn't know who I was, why should she even be there? I was really confused. I didn't know what office she was talking about, where it was, or who the hell I was supposed to be. I mean, she was talking directly to me in a trance, and I fumbled around to figure out who she thought she was talking to. I told her I was just testing her memory. She laughed that bitchy laugh and told me I was Dr. Jensen. I asked her if this was the first time she'd been to my office, and she told me that I knew it wasn't her first time. She was speaking to me like I was a damned fool, which I suppose I deserved in terms of what she was experiencing. I asked her where the office was located. She again was very scornful of me for asking such a dumb question, but finally said it was in Oakland, California. I asked her what she was doing in my office. She said she was there to get her vitamin shot. I asked her what her name was. That really bugged her, and she became angry and said I had a nerve asking her name. She asked me what my name was. I said Jensen. Then I asked her again for her name. Arlene, she said. I asked her what was her last name. She said Grant. I asked her where she was born, and she said Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. I then asked her if she knew Candy Jones. Oh, yes, she said. She's weak. She has no strength. And that was it. I brought her out of the trance, and she looked at me with the softness I'm used to with Candy and said, "Oh, John, what's wrong? Did you wake up?" It was following that session that Nebel went to Irving Miller at Bryce and purchased his TC-142 recorder. So that was basically, that was when he realized something really big was going on, and that's when he started recording these statements. And Arlene has like quite the personality. There's a lot of transcripts. I think this is the first one that he recorded, and I'll just read a little bit from it. Basically, Bain does preface this by saying, the following is a transcript of these two important sessions, condensed where possible without losing or altering material. I ask the reader, again, to bear in mind that this, like all transcripts in the book, does not accurately reflect the tone and tempo of the sessions. There are many long pauses, inarticulate responses, and lengthy attempts to elicit an answer to certain questions. Just prior to turning on the tape recorder, and immediately following his recognition that he was talking to Arlene, Nebel asked her whether she was a strong person. He turned on the machine. So here we go. Arlene says, "Yes, I'm strong. How have you been?" "Not well." "What has been wrong?" "She's very upset." "Who is?" "Candy." "I haven't heard from you for a long time, Arlene. Where have you been?" "Waiting." "Waiting for what?" Arlene, after repeated attempts by Nebel to get an answer, "To go." "Where do you want to go, or have Candy go?" Arlene with a sneer, "She's going." "Where is she going, Arlene?" "Wherever I send her. Wherever we send her." "Who's we?" "You, I, and who else?" Her voice a dark threat. "No one else is necessary." "Why would I want to send her any place?" I hear you, I know you." "Sure you know me. You know my name, don't you?" "John." "How did you happen to come tonight at this time?" "She's weak." "In what way is she weak, Arlene?" "She couldn't hold me in." "You know I love her, don't you?" "No." Nebel tries to get her to explain why she feels he doesn't love Candy. She eventually agrees that he has treated Candy well. Arlene says, "She's weak. I have to take over." He asks her in what way she has to take over. "I'll step into her shoes for a while." "Do you think you have that right?" "She has that damn stomach ache." Nebel proceeds to ask Arlene a series of questions, but she ignores them and simply makes flat statements. He finally asks her whether she likes Candy. "I have to. I'm stuck with her. How else do I get out?" Nebel tries to get her to tell him why she wants to come out. She sighs a great deal and stretches as she ignores his questions. She finally replies, "Because it's very boring to do nothing." "Don't you think Candy is doing a lot?" "She's upset." "Do you think you have a right to interfere in her life?" In a spiteful voice, "When she's weak, I can come out." "What would be a sign of strength on Candy's part as far as you're concerned?" "No tears, none of this garbage." She sounds disgusted. Did she ever cry when she was a little girl? Not when I was there. Do you know if she did cry when you weren't there? Scornfully, she was weak. She cried alone. Alone. She was lonesome. Very sarcastic. She wanted friends. Nebel then turned the conversation to Dr. Gilbert Jensen. There had been an indication during previous sessions that Jensen, in some unexplained way, had been involved in Candy's life beyond what Nebel had earlier been led to believe. He asked Arlene now whether Jensen had done Candy any harm. Arlene says, I did it. You don't like us. You don't like any of the group. You mean Willie and the rest of them? It's not for you. What's not for me? Nonsense. This nonsense. You label me nonsense. Nebel brings the conversation back to Dr. Jensen and asks Arlene whether Jensen did Candy any harm. She didn't even know what he was doing. She thought he was a doctor helping her. What did you think he was doing for her? Releasing me. What method did he use to accomplish this? Injections. Candy had told John in a previous occasion that Dr. Jensen had administered vitamin shots to her when she visited his office. Nebel asks Arlene whether the injections she refers to were vitamin shots. They were. It made me strong enough to come out. How do you know they were vitamins? Nebel had always been suspicious of the shots because, according to Candy, they'd been administered intravenously rather than in the muscle of the arm or the buttocks. They weren't vitamins. They were vitamins to her. But you know better. I know better. I listened. Nebel then brought up another question concerning Dr. Jensen. This was prompted by material that had emerged during previous conscious and hypnotic conversations and which had been causing an increasing tension between them over the past few months. It had to do with Candy's apparent distrust and even hatred of an inordinate number of people, particularly ethnic groups. She was, on the one hand, seemingly without prejudice, but there were times when her spoken feelings about such groups did not correspond with what Nebel knew about her from observing her daily actions. And once, while questioning her about it in the conscious state, she'd referred to Jensen. She hadn't accused Jensen of anything, but her mention of him in the context of that discussion caused Nebel to again question the role Jensen might have played in this erratic side of Candy's behavior. So John continues, do you think he caused her to hate a lot of people? Arlene laughs and says, everyone. That's the whole plan. That was Jensen's plan? Is that what you're saying? He kept her away from people. She laughs again. He made her hate people? Not hate people, avoid them. Avoid relationships. Why has she used the obscenities to refer to different ethnic groups? She doesn't swear. I didn't say swear. She doesn't swear, does she? Yawning. Oh, not really. She doesn't say obscenities. I mean using derogatory terms to describe different ethnic groups. Did he teach her that? I don't know what you mean. Are you going to sleep now? If I do, I may not be here when I wake up. Where will you be then? She'll try to get me back. I want to go out. Look up. Look up, look up, look up at the sky. Do you know her mother is ill? She's dying. She knows it. She's not admitting it. Was her mother nice to her when she was a young girl? Arlene snorting. You've got to be joking. You know she wasn't. I wasn't there. Do you think her mother was bad to her? She criticized her all the time, all the time. She broke her spirit. That was the idea. Break her down, break her down. Her mother did it. Harry Conover did it. I watched it. I wasn't around with him, but I watched. Did you like Harry? If I could have come out, what would you have done? Scared the hell out of him. You never scared me. He would have been scared. So that was, I guess, the end of like the first session with Arlene. And you can see, you know, she's got an attitude. And as mentioned there's a later chapter that does go further into depth about the weird adoption of racist sentiments that seemed to particularly come out when she was in a trance as Arlene. And she eventually did say, basically, so there was another doctor, I think that's worth mentioning, and like we said, it's a little complicated. For legal reasons, Donald Bain used aliases for all of these CIA doctors to avoid getting sued. And as far as we've been able to tell, there might be information somewhere out there where somebody has sleuthed this, but there's only one real life doctor that had been exposed, but there's disagreement over whether or not that doctor was Gilbert Jensen or Gilbert Jensen's superior, who is another prominent Californian doctor whose alias is Dr. Marshall Berger, who Bain describes as a pioneer and leading authority in the field of medical hypnosis. His stature brought him into contact with many familiar names in government and show business. And he enjoyed this proximity to fame. A dynamic, craggy-faced egotist, Berger enjoyed being close to the glamorous women of show business, especially film stars, and his eventual move from the Midwest to Southern California was prompted in part by this weakness. Another reason Berger moved to California was to be close to the government-sponsored experimental programs with which he was closely identified. He'd begun working on such programs during World War II and was one of the first doctors to probe the potentials of hypnosis as a tool of war. His sponsor for that project was the Central Intelligence Agency. As the CIA's experiments in mind control progressed into the 1960s, Berger became the project's messiah and undertook to train other physicians for the company. And one of those physicians was Gilbert Jensen. And I guess... and
Martin
also
Cannon's book.
I just want to mention. You want to say something?
I was just gonna say that he claims to have gone through the files of John Marks, who was the guy who wrote The Search for the Manchurian Candidate.
Yes.
And that's where I think the identification of Marshall Berger with Dr. William Kroger is from those files. But John Marks, I guess, didn't necessarily make the identification with them, nor I guess Donald Bain. But according to him, that's what those files that Marx compiled when he was researching that book say, which I guess he was able to look through.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that is the one. Okay, so I guess that's where the one identification comes from. Dr. William S. Kroger, who has both been described as being Dr. Gilbert Jensen and Marshall Berger. I forget what the other case was where they said. Let me just see. And it's kind of. Let's see, Doctor. So on this, one of the few. There not a surprising lack of kind of follow-up research and things like that. I feel like there was more when I discovered this like 5 or 6 years ago on the internet, and it's just buried by Google. But the one fragment, yes, Martin Cannon is the one who interviewed Candy Jones before she died in 1990, and according to that, the Marshall Berger alias in Bain's book, who worked with Jensen, was actually Dr. William S. Kroger, a psychologist at one time associated with UCLA. No big surprise there. And also, it says right before that, at least on this article, the doctor who treated Jones told her that his name was Dr. Gilbert Jensen and claimed to be a young medical officer, but in reality, he was Dr. William S. Kroger. So
it must be an error by the writer, especially if they say later on that. They say later on. Yeah, it must be. Yeah,
and I'm sure if I sleuthed it, because these guys were at least Dr. William S. Kroger was prominent enough that, and anybody that's heard the Esther Brooks Erickson episode will be interested to know that. They were in a very specific field together, and they were not strangers because Kroger co-founded the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis with Milton H. Erickson in, I think...
Yeah, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if, Esther Brooks was Jensen. If, assuming this is all, it could, all the details are remembered exactly accurately and everything... then I feel like Esther Brooks would almost be a shoo-in for that role, with the timing of everything. But it could be someone else. There were only so many people who were trusted to do this type of hypnosis at that time.
It can't be. Yeah, you're right. It can't be that big of a field of people, basically, that to choose from. And I already had some names running through my head. And actually, the funny thing is, the whole time I was thinking, was William Jennings Bryan III one of these people? Because he is somebody who I think, according to maybe according to a couple high-priced escorts, William Jennings Bryan. well, there's William Jennings Bryant, the perennial presidential candidate, and then his grandson, I believe, was a CIA psychologist.
I see.
Yeah,
okay,
who
that makes sense.
I forget. I'm forgetting the source of it right now. It might have been mentioned in the Chaos book, but that William Jennings Bryan III bragged, I guess, at one point to some high-priced escorts that he was partying with in L.A. that he was the hypnotist and psychologist of Sirhan Sirhan, and programmed him to kill. Well, not actually kill, but programmed him to attempt to kill and be a patsy. And so that was kind of hovering in the back of my mind the whole time. But then I found in this chapter about called Taught to Hate, where it talks about the weird racial prejudice that seemed to be, hypnotically induced in Candy Jones. There's a little passage here because I guess, she was being taught, and there's actually a few things in here. So I'll just read this, so she said when Nebel was basically, had her under trance, and she told Nebel that a, quote, man from California had taught her to avoid all people, particularly blacks, Jews, and Italians. She reiterated her distrust of the Chinese and Japanese and mentioned she had seen the terrible things the Japanese had done during World War II. She finished the session by saying that Jensen taught her always to listen, but never to say anything. Dr. Marshall Berger had taught her the same thing. Berger, in his teaching role for the CIA, conducted seminars in various parts of the country and was a founder of a CIA-funded institute in Northern California. Now, I think that has to be SRI or Esalen, one of the two. But anyways,
did Esalen exist at that time?
I believe it opened in the 1950s. So yes, during the time that she was doing stuff, it absolutely was operating in the early to mid 60s. It was definitely around. It was, let me see. It might 1960.
In the 60s? Or I guess,
yes, she was. Yeah, this time period of her operating is like 1960 to 72. Yeah, and so Esalen was founded in 1962.
Yeah, that would make sense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Martin
and actually,
Buchanan also mentioned there was like an institute in Northern California, and he knew what it was, but he wouldn't say either. But it did seem
that's
like
very weird that they wouldn't, that nobody will just say it. Like, so many weird things happen at SRI. And, Esalen was founded by two Stanford graduates, Michael Murphy and Dick Price. Yeah. And Aldous Huxley was deeply involved, I think, from the very beginning. And Hunter Thompson was just running around as a lowly security guard during this time, just being random and inventing gonzo journalism. Anyways, so this could either be SRI or Esalen, or maybe a third place. But anyways, Candy visited this institute on at least 2 occasions, according to material taken from 2 lengthily taped hypnotic sessions. Nebel vigorously pursued the question of Berger's and Jensen's programming of Candy, and was able to ascertain that she had been given a series of tests at the institute, most of which had to do with her senses. So it sounds kind of like parapsychological a little bit. She said during a hypnotic session that she was tested by Berger for her sense of observation, smell, touch, taste, and hearing. During that hypnotic session, Candy said that the tests were administered to her by one of Berger's assistants, a woman in a white uniform who Candy described as, quote, a zombie. Candy ranked highest on the scent test, and this is perhaps why Gilbert Jensen often burned incense in his office while inducing a trance in her. During another hypnotic session, Nebel was able to pinpoint the date of one of Candy's visits to the Institute as June 3rd, 1968. Candy wasn't sure at first whether it was June 3rd or June 5th, her confusion having to do with the time change and with not being sure the specific day she left New York to come to California. It was also brought out during this session that Gilbert Jensen had studied under Berger at the Institute. Jensen boasted to Candy about Berger's tutoring, and she accused him of being in awe of Berger and of wanting to be taken into Berger's confidence. In another hypnotic session, Nebel, playing the role of Gilbert Jensen, asked Candy whether she liked Berger. Candy said, I don't know. I don't like him or dislike him. I don't know. I wouldn't want him as a personal friend. Why do you ask? Well, we work together. You know that. I know you'd like to work together. What do you mean like to? You'd like to get in with him, wouldn't you? You seem to think he is so wonderful. Why should I try to get in with Berger? I know as much as he does. He's no brain. Everybody thinks he is. Who? Well, you always talk about him as though he is so important. Him and his fat friends. They're all fat. What fat friends? I don't know their names. So not only was she programmed to be racist, also programmed to be fat phobic, and but so what jumped out at me, because I was reading like, oh, him and his fat friends. William Jennings Bryan III was notoriously rotund and was like 300 pounds, like he was a gigantic man. So I
think, by the way, it was William minor point, but it was William Joseph Bryan, because I was a bit like thrown by that. But
no,
his grandson. But
no, it is William Jennings Bryan. It's in the book. I'm looking at it right here. He might have had another grandson that was a sus. Yeah, if you do William Jennings Bryan, let me see. Unless Donald Bain.
Yeah, I mean, he might have been.
William Joseph. Because I remember discovering it maybe in Operation Mind Control. Oh, you're right. It is William Joseph Bryan. Maybe the typo in this book like wormed its way into other books.
It's very likely. I mean, all these books do kind of cite each other.
That is a very weird thing, because it's like, oh, that's why I haven't been getting good, Google hits on this guy, is because it's misprinted. I am looking at it right here. William Jennings Bryan, written in the book. So what are you doing here, Playboy Press, by the way, who published this?
Well, is it William Jennings in the book? Is it William Jennings Bryan or William Jennings Bryant? I can't quite hear if there's
it's Bryan, like the politician.
So like the guy.
Yeah. But I guess William J. Bryan.
The medic name, instantly, recognizable. So it is William J. Bryan. But
William Joseph. So he does actually have his own Wikipedia page, and was involved in psychological warfare during the Cold War and modern hypnotherapy. And so he was he was the other big. I mean, even more so than Estabrook in terms of his prominence. He was really the second guy that was up there with Milton Erickson, and I think they worked together. He also, even on his Wikipedia page, it says he was involved in Project Artichoke and MK Ultra, and in behavioral engineering of humans. He developed techniques of what he called hypno-conditioning. His published research from that era focused on the forensic and military range of psychological research. And so this guy's like a major sus lord, and like I said, he did brag to some people at some point that he was the guy who hypno-programmed Sirhan. But I will say this, which is kind of interesting, that Donald Bain, I guess he knows his audience, and he put a little asterisk there under fat friends, and his footnote here says, Nebel admits to having wondered whether the California psychiatrist William Jennings Bryan might have been involved in some manner with Berger. Bryan had been linked to the CIA and had been the technical consultant for the film The Manchurian Candidate, which dealt with hypnoprogramming. He was to learn from Candy, however, that not only was... So according to Candy, not only was Bryan not involved, she had never even heard of him, despite his flamboyant manner and penchant for publicity. So...
I mean, that's like the whole thing with this, that there's many wrinkles and many layers to it. Like, on one hand, I also wouldn't say that it seems like they made this up as a con job, because why even bother recording all these hours of tapes? It's obviously not that this guy and his wife are running a con. They might be sort of psyoping themselves. That would be the least, that would be the most skeptical that I think would be remotely tenable, was that they were involved in something to do with her childhood, blah blah, and his interests coming out. Then even if we take this to be real, then that she was involved in some kind of sleeper agent thing, her testimony about it would naturally be how much of it can we take to be true, especially if they're manipulating the memories and things like that. If you it goes both ways in terms of what since these things are recovered through hypnosis, if they're induced by hypnosis, all the things that are possible through the first hypnotic induction are possible through the last one, and there are things remaining from the first induction like amnesia, etc.
Yes,
that, like,
yes.
still be operating. Screen memories, are the famous thing.
Oh yeah.
So, like,
No, for sure. And Bain makes that point elsewhere throughout the book at basically how there's a lot that Candy Jones did in her work for Dr. Jensen that she just can't recover. And he says that, the studies in hypnosis and everything have proven that basically triggering amnesia, especially if you're doing it in a very careful kind of methodical way. And of course, like we did mention it, or it was mentioned by Arlene in the interview, the vitamin shots that Jensen would always give her, which it turned out later on were like an entire cocktail of things, including Thorazine and also a Soviet drug that I guess was kind of like an antipsychotic or a sedative that they were also testing on her, perhaps to gauge the effectiveness of like Soviet drugs or seeing like what kind of results they could get out of it. She probably was also dosed with LSD, and also things such as scopolamine and belladonna. And that jumped out at me as well, because belladonna was something, there's like a very obscure, it's kind of one of the better, if you're going to watch anything on the Manson family, there was like a very creepy, 1972 documentary about the Manson family, like after Charles Manson went to jail, but just focusing on like the mostly the girls that were still free, but were very unrepentant. And I remember they told some like really insane, like maniacal stories about like psychedelic sex rituals and like sacrificing people. And I remember Squeaky Fromm specifically talking about how they were, obviously they were taking LSD, but they were taking a lot of belladonna, is what she said. And I noticed that here because when they were in one of these chapters about drugging her in Oakland, Bain wrote, "As I write this book in the summer of 1975, the nation's leading newspapers and television programs daily report new revelations with regard to government testing of behavior-modifying drugs. It was not only the CIA that experimented on innocent and unknowing persons. The Army, according to published reports, has been testing such substances as LSD, atropine, and scopolamine since the early 1950s and continues to do so. Atropine is a natural extract of belladonna plants and is a well-known poison. Scopolamine is a depressant. Both drugs are used medically for motion sickness, muscle relaxation, sedation, and amnesia to childbirth, and for a host of other therapeutic strategies. Given in large doses, both drugs can cause hallucinations. The Army claims to have ceased experimentation with LSD in 1967, just in time for the Summer of Love, but admits that the 535 servicemen and civilians giving LSD during an 8-year testing program had not been informed that they were receiving the drug. In all, over 2,000 human subjects were tested under this project, and the Army currently awaits approval from the Surgeon General's office to mount new tests." And it was also revealed in 1975 that the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare had tested LSD on 2,500 prisoners, mental patients, and paid volunteers since 1954. HEW claims that all subjects gave their prior consent, although one wonders how mental patients could legally give such approval. It was also pointed out that in addition to HEW's direct testing programs, millions of dollars had been granted to more than 30 university researchers for additional testing of LSD on human subjects, primarily college students. So belladonna is, I guess, like a very like scary psychedelic. It almost sounds like STP. Like a bad acid or something, and that's what like Manson had a huge supply of belladonna for some reason and was giving it out all the time. So that jumps out as a little bit like I don't know, weirdly sophisticated for this ex-con hippie whatever guy. That gets into a whole thing. But they were trying out all kinds of things, and who knows what they were giving Candy Jones. Though Bain also makes the point, it's worth noting, that I guess according to most of the hypnotists he spoke to, that it's actually ideal to put somebody into a hypnotic trance without drugs. But it's more...
that's what Erickson sort of had said,
basically that like you could achieve...
I actually agree,
you can achieve a deeper hypnosis, but like if you need it in a pinch, it does help. She also mentioned in one of her trances being injected with sodium pentothal, and sodium amytal, which are, like the truth serum drugs, basically, that you could give to people, which I guess also can help induce a hypnotic trance, especially if somebody is very resistant to the idea of kind of getting involved. It's sort of it's like a hack. It's not perfect, and maybe you won't get as deep of a, hypnotic trance, or it won't stick as much as if they're kind of just fully sober, but, brought into it naturally. But yeah, so, I mean, they were experimenting on her, basically. And I mean, even a lot of her things that she ended up doing at first, Donald Bain seems to think that they weren't even necessarily real missions at first, but in fact, they were like tests, I mean, she wasn't told they were tests, but he, probably the envelopes she had to go deliver perhaps were not of, a very top secret quality at first. He was trying to see, could I get her just to do this at first? And then when she performed that well, then he started to send her on missions abroad, starting in... Donald Bain Candy Jones wasn't sure, but Donald Bain thinks it was in 1966 when she made her first overseas trip to Taiwan.
Well, yeah, concerning, like, those things, and also, like, her trip, there's always the possibility, like, in the same way that some of these things, or if they were like sort of test missions, like maybe they were, but one wonders, like, how many of them were like, a test of her ability to imagine these things like in her mind or something. There's like all sorts of like possibilities, like the Taiwan experience also, I wonder about that as well, but we should go into like what actually she recalls happening.
Exactly. That's really fascinating. And because she ends up, she goes several times, and it's pretty simple the first time. So she Jensen instructs her to go, and I believe she does mention before going to the foreign travels that I guess Donald Bain wanted to include, which is kind of interesting, where Nebel asked her about her New York social life and if she went to cocktail parties, and she said, I go to screenings, that's all. And she said, oh, but I went to that cocktail party just like you told me to. And he said, which party was that? She said, the party at 21, Bill Buckley's. That's William F. Buckley, CIA agent, Skull and Bones man, firing line host. And, he said, why did you go to that one? Who told you to go? You did, she replied, annoyed that he'd forgotten. I had the picture taken. Nebel paused to collect his thoughts, because Nebel is playing Jensen right now. What happened to the picture? Candy was even more annoyed at his question about the picture. I brought it to you. You've got it. Why did I want the picture? Asked Nebel, still in the role of Gilbert Jensen. I don't know. I don't know anything. Nebel was at a loss for a moment. Finally, he asked, did Bill Buckley treat you nicely? Yes, Candy answered with a pleased chuckle. Very nicely. He's a very nice... That man came in and insulted him just like you said he would. It was, wow, I couldn't believe it. What happened? That man... Tell me about it again. Let's see if you remember. The man insulted him. He came right over. He's standing to the right of me in the picture. He called Buckley names. He told him what a fink he was, but he used bad words. Nebel asked, who did that? Candy didn't respond. Who do you think that man was? Nebel asked. Candy made a series of sucking sounds before answering, I don't know. You know who he is. I don't know him. I never saw him before. It's right there in the picture, out on your desk. What did the man do then? He left. No further information on the scene was gathered through subsequent hypnotic sessions, most likely because what Candy reported to Jensen during that regression was the extent of her knowledge. So that's weird that she was like sent to like a William F. Buckley party, and then some guy came in and just started like insulting him, and then he left, but like she knew he was going to do that. It's just like very odd.
Yeah.
Very odd. And
right.
Yeah. So then, after that, she gets sent to go to Taiwan, which Bain says turned out to be terrifying for Candy, although it was Arlene who functioned on them as company representative, and it was Arlene who bore the brunt of the resulting physical and mental anguish. And so she went there, and I guess she met with a Taiwanese contact who's under another... Well, they don't actually really know his name, but they're calling him Chin Chen. and he met her at the airport. She offered to hand him the envelope that she was carrying, but he insisted that she accompany him to his home. She was wary, but went with him, and they went to like a palatial kind of country estate, and with like servants everywhere, and including 2 young Chinese women dressed in white laboratory frocks, who Chen said were the household help. And, you know, they hung out for 3 days. They went sightseeing. They, you know, had big dinners. They had like a farewell party on the last night. And she came back, and it was great. And, you know, she flew as Arlene Grant. Jensen would give her a black wig, dark makeup, and, you know, kind of a different outfit. And he had a passport for her that she carried with her, so she could, you know, which presumably the CIA would have hooked up. So she had this kind of fake, her alter had a real passport she could travel with. And, you know, it was, it seemed to be fine, but then she went again. And it was like the exact thing. She went to Jensen's office in Oakland, got an intravenous feeding of his alleged vitamins, and came out as Arlene Grant, flew to Taiwan, met Mr. Chen. They drove to his country home, and Arlene became his house guest for a second time. This time, however, Chen, the host, became Chen, the torturer. And it's like a little bit unclear exactly what happened, but what is certain is that Arlene was detained by Chen for at least 2 days, possibly 3, during which time he and his associates attempted to extract information from her by various methods of physical torture. What was it that they felt Arlene knew or possessed is unknown, but it was apparently valuable enough for them to use torture in an attempt to get it. She'd handed over the envelope to Chen as instructed, and every hypnotic tape dealing with his experience contains repeated denials of having any of the information asked for by Arlene's torturer. And yeah, I guess they relived this in December 1974 in a hypnotic session. She described being electroshocked she had wires attached to her. She says, "You've got that thing strapped to me." Nebel asked her to describe that thing. She told him it was a small box on the table from which wires led to her wrist and to her shoulder. Nebel offered to remove the wires from her and placed his hand on her left wrist. She informed him that the wire was attached to the opposite wrist. He eventually followed her instructions and removed all the imaginary wires from her body, as well as the tape that had held them to her skin. The removal of the tape was felt by her, and she reacted when the adhesive was stripped away. "That hurt awful," Candy said, rubbing the spots of the wires had been. John said, "I don't know who told anybody to do that to you." "You did," she responded, annoyed. "You told her, and I don't know anything. Nobody here believes me." So, yeah, basically, she relived this experience. It was very upsetting, and I guess there were further details of the torture.
So what role? So I guess was Long John taking on the role of Chen in that scenario?
He must have been. Yeah, he was taking on the role of Chen. Yeah, exactly. So she's saying, "You did this to me," and so. Yeah, when they did this again, she got a little more specific about it, and, you know, basically she described what was happening to her. She said they put a solution first on the skin. He asked, "A saline solution?" She said, "I don't know, a solution. They put it on with gauze and a long stick, like a Q-tip. They stuck a wire on the wet area." She pointed to various parts of her body, including her breasts. Nebel asked whether they'd ever attached the wires there, and she replied that they had threatened to place the electrodes on her breasts if she didn't cooperate. Candy says, "They put the wire on your finger and..." Wait a minute, let's take it step by step. "Do they wrap the wire around your finger?" "No, they just touch it to the area where the solution is." "Is the current on?" "Of course." "And the wire is attached to a box?" "Yes, like a manicure set or an electric hair roller, a little box with a few dials on it. And there are 2 little wires, and they touch them." "They don't touch the 2 wires to you, do they?" "Oh, yes, they do. They touch both wires." "Did it spark?" "I didn't look, but I heard it. It hisses. And it hurts. Momentarily, it's a shock. It makes a blister. And then they stop it?" "Yeah." "What did you do with the blisters?" "I opened them myself with a sterilized needle." "How many blisters were there?" "Let me see. There was 1 here," and John, observing her, "Wait a minute. That's the right hand, 4th finger." "Yeah, that was a big one." She also pointed to the little finger of her right hand and indicated the blister had run all the way down the little finger to the palm, and that her right thumb had also been badly blistered from the electrodes. "They like to get to your joints or to your fingernail because that's more painful." And this is a little passage that really jumped out at me right after this because it reminded me of Salem and some of the Soviet parapsychology stuff. But okay, get a load of this. At that point, there is a discussion between John and Candy about the fingers on her right hand and about the fact that there were physical signs on them of actual blisters. This phenomenon, usually termed memory tissue in the field of parapsychology, was discussed during the preparation of this book and is one of its more bizarre and debatable aspects. Research over the years has shown that a good hypnotic subject is sometimes capable of exhibiting so-called memory tissue when regressed to a point in time when a physically traumatic experience took place. An example might be a child burning his or her hand at the age of 5. When the child has reached adulthood, all traces of the burn have disappeared. But it is possible, say some researchers, to raise the same blister on the same hand during hypnotic regression many years later. Dr. Robert London, when asked on the Nebel show whether he could accept the theory of memory tissue, replied, quote, "I'm in conflict. From a scientific point of view, I would have great difficulty believing that I could see blisters in a hypnotic subject, or to believe that blisters could occur. The blisters are there for a reason when you are truly burned. Yet, there is another part of me which would lead me to give potential credibility to the theory of memory tissue. There is a memory bank in cells." Nebel brought up the fact that a good hypnotic subject will drop a cold object if told by the hypnotist that it is, in fact, red hot, because he has accepted that suggestion while in the trance state. Dr. London agreed with this and then went on to elaborate on his statement that cells have a memory. Citing the field of immunization, he commented that researchers are pointing in the direction of recognizing that body cells do have a memory system of sorts, and that immunity might be linked in some way to this system. The question of whether the body is capable of reproducing physiological symptoms through hypnotic regression will be debated for many years to come. Research is always open to question, and the myriad variables inherent in hypnotic research further complicate the problem. I recently interviewed a New York neurologist, Dr. Kenneth Jordan, Assistant Chief of Neurology at Staten Island Public Health Hospital. We discussed the theory of engrams, theoretical memory structures created at the time a new piece of information is learned. I asked Dr. Jordan his feelings about the possibility of memory tissue manifesting itself as reported by Candy. First of all, Jordan said, a more apt term would be memory tracings, and a reasonable inference would be that because of the tremendous effective input surrounding the real physical input, these engrams, these components of memory tracing, have not developed the same inhibitory components that less traumatic experiences have developed. They thus continuously remain more accessible to conscious recall. It may take only a small clue, an experience that is faintly similar to the previous experience, to eliminate the remaining tenuous inhibitory pathways and to allow the memory not only to come forward, but to rush forward with a vengeance. We also know the temporal lobe of the brain is intimately connected with the autonomic nervous system. This is part of the nervous system which controls blood pressure, intestinal emotion, muscle tone, etc. It is conceivable, but by no means proved, that at least anatomically and physiologically, the same area of the brain that is involved in the vengeful recall of the initial traumatic experience can, without too much difficulty, be simultaneously involved with the autonomic, involuntary physical phenomenon going on with the same person. And Bain says, I have personally been present in the Nebel apartment when memory tissue seemed to display itself in Candy. On this day, the memory tissue involved concerned the area in the crook of her arm in which Gilbert Jensen had injected the IV. After Nebel brought Candy out of the trance state, we closely examined her arm. There appeared to be a distension of the vein, as well as a mark that could have been made by a needle. Whether I saw these things because I wanted to see them is a question I cannot answer. I accepted what I believed I saw and report it here. So, yeah, and so...
Did you ever play that game, Cat Scratch, or Cat Scratches?
Was that like a little playground game?
Kind of. It's more of like a sleepover game, like Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board type thing.
Okay.
Basically, it's kind of like a hypnosis in a way, because you basically there's multiple versions of it, obviously, like there are of all these games, but basically you tell a long story about and you tell it, there's like one person who's like the subject, as it were, and you tell the story as if it's about the person, like you insert, the person's name into the story as like the protagonist, and basically you tell this long story while kind of like a lightly, and it's basically about being attacked by like a mob or like a giant scary cat, like a mob of cats or one big giant scary cat, and you sort of repeat like the phrase like cat scratches, cat scratches, and like as you're saying that, you kind of like very lightly like stroke your hands on the person's back. You know, like I didn't like, you know, ever experience this. I feel like maybe, you know, maybe it's in that sort of like you know, feminine tradition, because I didn't experience this until like, you know, I had my first girlfriend in like 8th grade, you know, and she mentioned to me, and I was like, what is that? You know, so maybe it's in the lineage of like witchery going all the way back to Salem. But you know, but basically, you know, you run your hands like lightly on the person's back, and then like if you pull up like their shirt, like you'll see like these scratches like that they're, you know, and it works.
So you put your hands down, like you don't scratch your fingernails on their back.
You don't actually scratch. Yeah, no, you sort of like just lightly run them.
Wow.
And like the scratches will actually appear.
That
like,
is,
you know,
yeah.
it
So
works.
again, the power of the mind. This is like pretty. That's a very interesting example.
Maybe there is some sort of mutual hypnosis happening where the person will perceive it because the expectation of the frame, like, could also be playing a role. But I don't know. Like, I was just remembering it as you were telling that story, and I looked it up on Reddit, and I saw some people being like, you know, what the hell? Like, what does this work? You know, and I remembered it being something that, you know, it definitely was, you know, because it is kind of this sort of hypnosis type thing in a way, because it's like this long sort of discursive
it's like
story
another
with,
one of those like, let me
you know?
tell you, let me do like a roundabout way of like
component.
hypnotizing you through a kind of like a story format, you know, sort of like this narrative device of like, let me tell you, we're gonna play and like a game, like we're gonna play a game, you know. I wonder, like so many kids games could involve like casual kind of like hypnotic elements without people really consciously
Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board is another one. That's like,
it is.
You know, Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board, like you repeat it over and over, like, and that's sort of how it's supposed to work.
The collective will makes you light as a feather and stiff as a board. Yeah,
I actually just purchased for 99 cents on Kindle William Joseph Bryan Jr. MD's book, Religious Aspects of Hypnosis.
Okay.
Which,
I mean, that sounds like a whole episode right there.
Yeah, right. He has a chapter, The Evidence of Jesus Using Hypnosis to Heal, and The Hypnotic Proof of God. You know, yeah, but like to him, basically, like hypnosis is, kind of what you're talking about, like mind over matter type thing. You know, he quotes Sidney Van Pelt, who is like, I think a Swedish like hypnotist or something like that. I want to say Swedish, Sidney Van Pelt. I look him up, but he was an Australian. All right, I don't know where I got.
Oh God,
from,
they are all up in that business of MK Ultra kind of stuff in Australia. All the Five Eyes countries were, you know, neck deep in it, but Australia was as well, including I think maybe
he was a
Nicole Kidman's father,
commander in the Royal Navy, obviously, and he worked at the Alfred Hospital in Melbourne. But anyway, so he has a whole long quote from him about various things, just talking about how you know, in many cases where one old person dies, the companion has lost all will to live and dies shortly thereafter. It is well known that a native will sicken and die of no clinically demonstrable disease if he believes that the medicine man or witch doctor has put a curse on him. The native simply hypnotizes himself into believing he will die, and so he does. You know, so at the very
least, a double-edged sword.
You know, this is what William Joseph Bryan, you know, was saying was, you know, how hypnosis worked. Like he says that people who are old, like centenarians, people who live to 100, have hypnotized themselves into a strong desire to live and enjoy life, and so they influence their organs and glands. They work to maximum efficiency. So that's like the kind of stuff that his conception of hypnosis. You know, he basically thinks, like we were kind of talking about before, that prayer is a form of hypnosis. Actually,
like everything involves inducing trance states in yourself or others. Basically.
There's actually there's a funny part where he laments that like Muslim, you know, children, when they're praying to Muhammad or whatever, you know, like they like repeat like phrases, and they do it like a couple times a day, and they're like trained from very young to do this, and he's you know, upset about how Protestantism doesn't have this same mastery of hypnosis that the Muslims, you know, have to get people to prey. But
interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
yes,
that's I mean, even thinking about the very real phenomenon of if babies are not touched, they can die after they're born.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Like if they're not held by a person,
they need to be socialized. Yeah.
Yeah, they need to be and it's like it literally can kill them if they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that seems to be a thing that it's hard to draw a straight physiological line to like why would that kill a baby, but in a baby's consciousness, maybe they hypnotize themselves into being. It's so terrifying
this guy basically
to not be
has
touched that they die.
This guy basically has a reading of the Bible that, like, when Jesus would cure lepers, he would basically, and, like, when he would say things, like, when he would lay on hands and be like, according to your faith, be it unto you, and things like that, that would be
which
like
actually kind of it puts the context of like faith is the most important thing in a kind of different light, that he who believes in me like shall not taste death, or shall be healed or whatever. And I guess if you believed in him and then he hypnotized you, it worked.
Well, what about like faith healers and things like that?
Sure, we still have that today.
In our previous episode about hypnosis, where people were like, if you're hypnotized, you will reach your hand into like rattlesnakes, like the incredible power of hypnosis. But like snake handlers, when they go into like these ecstatic trances, like they obviously will handle dangerous snakes, and like people will experience speaking in tongues and things like that.
Yeah,
like,
the walk on hot coals.
Like they're not. People tend to be like, oh, that's religious. They're just like saying gobbledygook. But if you, sorry, that was a gobbledygook is a charged phrase. I feel like, especially, but nonsense or something. I apologize.
We got a gobbledygook.
We got ourselves. He's won the heart of Harvard. But anyway, so.
That's a deep cut for any WWF
anyway,
fans
well, some might say that we got ourselves a gobbledygooker. They will say it's a real experience, or faith healer actually like healing illnesses, that kind of stuff does happen. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, and like I think that even the substances they were experimenting with, like the belladonna, or scopolamine, those are kind of like herbs that even have a sort of lineage, or those are chemicals that have some kind of lineage or association with like the occult, which I guess like a lot of these entheogens do. But that's kind of the nature of the experimentation.
Ergot,
but
other stuff.
Yeah. So insofar as I don't know, like to what extent that was sort of in the air at the time, but from that, like that is kind of a credible story, and also even the whole idea of using hypnosis to sort of hone parapsychological or sort of ESP type abilities. That was definitely something that as we talked about in our Erickson Estabrooks episode. That was something that was very much like believed to be associated with hypnosis, like the power of remote viewing, stuff like that. I think that even where there were some cases like in the popular press where discussion of hypnosis, and the association with being hypnotized and being able to perform telepathy or something like that would be out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You bill your show as the art of conversation. Lively art of conversation, meaningful conversation.
We hope so.
At best, what can shows like those that we all do, either on radio, television, or PBS or NBC, at best, what can we do for people?
I think we have three motives, at least I do personally. One, I try to educate people and try to give them some information that they may not get elsewhere. Two, I try to stimulate the art of conversation. I think we're losing that art in our country. Too many people sit and stare at that TV show. They don't talk. And I think our shows demonstrate what good conversation can do. So first, we're giving them some controversial issues, exploring them. Two, we're trying to teach them what conversation can do. And three, we try to entertain them. We have some light show. We have a lot of entertainers on the show. We try to be humorous at times. And I think if you supply those three objectives, you're doing a pretty good job in the talk show.
I sometimes wonder if, and I put myself in that same category, if we all are not just serving as plugging mechanisms for books, plays, nightclub acts, TV specials, whether we're really doing anything that's helping people or, as you say, educating them or entertaining them, or if we're not just all listening to our egos tickle.
I think it's the way the host handles the show, Tom, has a lot to do with the thing. If you have a book on the show and you've read the book and you can explore some of the salient features, something that is meaningful, you've contributed something to the audience. If you just let the author ramble on about how great the book is, then we're being used, and I think all of us hate to be used.
I find that too.
Is Candy allowed to speak now for a minute, Jim?
I apologize to you. What was the name again? Schneider?
Schneider?
In books, generally we try to avoid fiction, nonfiction, and I think that we hit upon matters of great importance in the country. Politics, medicine, unemployment, all sorts of things in areas where people seem to be concerned. And again, as Cup said, the art of conversation, and it is something that people can learn. And from the calls, do you have calls in? No, you don't have call-ins. We have call-ins, as you know. And it does seem to stimulate the ability to talk and to have, I use that word again, a meaningful type of conversation.
I'm often asked, who's watching at 1 o'clock in the morning? Who's listening at 4 o'clock in the morning, John?
Well, as soon as we announced our phone number, there are 5 lines. They all light up. We have a metering system. We have had at 4 o'clock in the morning as many as 9,000 calls. Now, we didn't take those calls.
No.
Right? But the fact is, there are people up all hours of the night. And, of course, we do cover a larger area than just New York City. We cover New England states.
Before we move on completely from the Taiwan scene, I just wanted to mention how it ended up, because it's kind of interesting. So after a few days of being tortured, according to Candy, the torture stopped only after Chen spoke with someone on the phone. Following the conversation, they released her from the chair in which she was strapped and became very friendly and apologetic. They told her the electrodes were not to torture her, but to help jog her memory in a scientific way. They insisted that she stay for lunch, which she did, and they drove her to the airport that night. She says, I wore gloves on the flight to California because my hand looked so terrible, and there was a smell from my fingers like sulfuric acid. Gilbert Jensen met her plane and took her to his office, where he gave her an injection. It was all a mistake, Jensen told her, a typographical error. Candy assumed he meant that a word in the message was wrong, and had led the Chinese man and woman to assume that she knew more than she was acknowledging. These conscious thoughts have come to Candy only in the very recent past. When she left Jensen's office that day and returned to New York, she literally had no memory of what happened on Taiwan. And then he mentions in the next chapter, because I was certainly thinking it, about this whole experience. There's one theory I would like to introduce, however, before proceeding with the tape transcripts covering Candy's subsequent trips to Taiwan. The possibility has occurred to me that Mr. Chen and the others involved in torturing Candy Jones might well have been employees of our own Central Intelligence Agency. I do not have any tangible evidence that this was the case, but the thesis nags at me as I deal with the material. After all, the value of Candy's and Arlene's messenger services to America and to the CIA must be questioned. To have put her through such nightmarish ordeals for the sole purpose of having an envelope delivered challenges my imagination, or at best causes me to view with an incredulous eye those making such decisions. Therefore, I have asked myself if it is possible that the torture of Candy Jones on Taiwan was another aspect of the testing program instituted by Gilbert Jensen. Putting her to the test, as it were, would have given tangible proof to Jensen and to his superiors that the so-called perfect messenger could be created through drugs and hypnosis. Such a test would have been of dubious value had Candy known ahead of time that she was to be tested, but sending her on what appeared on the surface to be legitimate and useful messenger runs, and having her intercepted and tortured would, it seems to me, have constituted a test that would satisfy the most demanding of scientists. If she broke under the mental and physical pressure, Jensen and his colleagues would know the experiment had failed, but a favorable report from Chen would be a reason for rejoicing in Oakland and in Langley, Virginia, the home of the CIA and its Science and Technology Directorate. And yeah, so like I would generally, it sounds like that is probably the case. You know, he also just says
kind of
it's
what definitely was definitely a possibility that occurred to me. Martin Cannon, I think, even took it a step further and said that like the whole thing was potentially like in her mind, even like let me see if I can find the footnotes where he suggested this. Yeah, in interviews, one of Mark's informants, that is John Marks, the guy, the author of Search for the Mediterranean Candidate, one of his informants offered the interesting speculation that Candy's torture sessions were not connected in the field but in the lab. Her entire mission might have been a hypnoprogrammed fantasy. So I guess that was one of his informants suggested that, but
interesting.
I think that yeah.
Yeah, and another potential wrinkle, because there's so many ways you could, there's so many potential layers to this. Bain says that another aspect of the Taiwan adventures that causes him to question Chen's actions is the use of electrodes. Electrodes have long been standard device used to test pain tolerance in hypnotic subjects. As reported by Dr. G.H. Estabrooks in his book Hypnotism, a device known as the Variac is plugged into a light socket, its leads placed on the subject's hands. A saline solution is used to establish the best possible contact, and according to Estabrooks, 15 volts of current would be very painful, 20 unbearable, but a good hypnotic subject in deep trance could withstand 60 or even 120 volts without flinching. And that makes me even think, like, what if they were
he wanted to use this as a test, exactly, testing how deeply hypnotized she was.
I mean, like, what if they were not to erase like that, she experienced something very painful and traumatic, but I guess according to the theories that were mentioned earlier in this book, there almost is no practical difference between thinking you're being electrocuted when you're under hypnosis and actually being electrocuted. It still causes pain.
Estabrooks actually wanted to use, I don't know if this was the situation actually she described it, but Estabrooks like wanted to use that to like test how deep someone's trance was, like actually electrocute them. So, that could have been part of it, maybe. I don't know. Like, remembered in some sort of, different way, maybe through, like, some layers of being recollected years later. I don't know, but...
Bain seems to think that it would have been a great boon for Jensen to have other people test the extent of Candy Jones' hypnotic state. Because, it'd be one thing for him to do it, but he's kind of her controller, so it might not be as impressive to get her to withstand a bunch of things under him, but to get this Mr. Chen and a bunch of people halfway around the world to do it, regardless of whether or not she was in it does seem like she did travel. Some of her friends have mentioned that she would disappear for long periods of time. I mean, who knows? Maybe they took her to some underground, bunker and told her, what. I mean, I don't know.
It seems odd that they would outsource that type of thing to someone in Taiwan. I mean, I know obviously, like,
not necessarily, because as Bain notes that the fact that this took place in Taiwan comes as no surprise, because Taiwan has been and continues to be a hotbed of CIA activity. Has been reported by various former CIA agents, now authors, that Taiwan has more foreign intelligence operatives than any other nation in the world. It would also follow that being California-based, Jensen's contacts would be in the Far East. And it also makes you think about that whole network of, like, China hands, that, like, Ray Klein and Edward Lansdale, who was in the Philippines, let's not forget, in 1945, running around looking for Yamashita's gold, right? Like, there was a lot going on in Philippines in the 1945, and a lot of operatives swirling around. And, of course, the Kuomintang, like, Taiwan is just like a vassal state of the Kuomintang, the right-wing nationalists that were backed by the CIA. And so it was basically a U.S. outpost as far as intelligence is concerned. So that doesn't surprise me too much at all.
Yeah. I mean, no, it's not.
Well, also, if you wanted to weaponize this and operationalize it, you're going to have to send people overseas eventually. So
deniability, maybe, in doing it, but I don't know.
I think that because she was sent to a few different places abroad, and you would want to test that at a certain point, like when you're outside of a familiar environment. And now, of course, like, this was not a hostile country in any ways, so the idea that these people would have been torturing a CIA asset. Why? Why would they be doing it?
It would be very unfamiliar. It would be abroad, so it would be disorienting. So that might be helpful as well. To Taiwan.
So I would lean towards these people were part of the experiment to test how well she could function in a more operational setting. Basically, it was an escalation from just sending her to like St. Louis or Chicago or something like that. And it was the very thing that like hypnosis, the number one thing they claimed was the benefit of like hypnotizing spies and couriers. Honestly, is that when tortured, they will not be able to give up any information or break their trance.
Yeah, honestly, my take though, like, would be that I'm not necessarily there's maybe like certain advantages to having her be like sort of a housewife and like pinup model, and maybe there's some sort of like espionage aspect to like her marriage to this guy John Nebel, who's like kind of a outlet for a lot of like skepticism of like the government or possible like unwanted knowledge or contraband information in some way. So there might be some aspect of that, but
that is interesting.
To me, like the super spy stuff, like that's what I find to be like maybe I find it more likely that she was like experimented upon, like in some way. Maybe the spy stuff is like I don't know.
I mean,
that seems like I'm more skeptical of that. Like,
to be clear,
world, but
to be clear, like Bain is not and neither is John Nebel or Candy Jones like making any very specific claims about types of operations that she was involved in. Like, according to her, she really has no memory of that because it was programmatically wiped out, through induced amnesia by Jensen. And I kind of feel like that's a little bit less important, whatever they actually did get her to do, because the real value, I think, of them getting control over Candy Jones was to test just if you could. This is like a concept, like this is a prototype, right? Like this is, can we do this to somebody and get to and basically enlist them in a way? And if you think about it, then the ramifications of this perhaps were maybe people like Sirhan, who, some have alleged that, William J. Bryan hypnoprogrammed to, shoot blanks at Bobby Kennedy and, other things and all kinds of other uses, right? I mean, even going into total like vigilant citizen territory of like the biggest pop stars are all going to have like a hypnotherapist that like secretly like controls them or something so that they don't go off the reservation or things like that. I think that really it sounds like the whole extent of most of the extent of her activities was not that she was actually this super spy that like did a bunch of things, kind of like, Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, which kind of makes me wonder if that guy was ever hypnotized. Chuck Barris, who was the Gong Show host, who was like flying around assassinating people. I mean, in his case, he claimed to be fully conscious of all this and, made a bunch of very specific claims about, murdering people all around the world. But Candy Jones doesn't really make any big things besides like, I went to deliver something to somebody and I have a blank spot in my memory and I don't know what I did. And so I think like that's pretty much they weren't able to access that part through hypnotic regression. So it leads me to believe that this was really kind of an experimental program to see how well could you do this to somebody, and even taking like a celebrity and doing it, like a prominent kind of figure, and getting them, basically, Bain cited earlier in the book the thing that we talked about in Esterbrook's episode, the whole personality A, personality B, inducing multiple personalities through hypnosis, and how, personality A would be a steadfast communist, but personality B would be a right-wing, anti-communist, but B would have access to all of the experiences and memories of A, and A wouldn't know that B existed. And so that, it seems like that is something that maybe they tried on Candy Jones, and it was easy for them to do because she already had this pre-existing personality kind of latent inside of her.
It seemed like she would be referring to it as something that existed like since childhood. Yeah, at least in her sort of descriptions. It seems like she would be talking about it as something that had been there from her youth, so maybe it was developed possibly, but
yeah. And it does make you think even about the later monarch rumors where they, by the 80s, according to some allegations, they realized, you have to influence children when they're very young, and then you get a much then maybe you can exacerbate hypnotic suggestibility in them if you start doing certain things.
Certainly, like if you condition someone from childhood, people are very impressionable when they're children, and I think that having like that sort of relationship with authority, that kind of abusive relationship with authority that she had with her parents, like that was in a way of kind of conditioning that, like, if this, that one could easily drop into the role of in a different dynamic, Yeah.
Yeah. And so, that after all those missions, I think that leads us to kind of the sort of the climactic event that she was able to recall. And that was when she started being taken to the farm, the CIA, training center right outside of Washington, D.C., and started receiving kind of paramilitary and spy training in a variety of ways. And I guess she went a number of times to not just the farm, but also to various Air Force bases. She also recalled having been to the paramilitary base in the Everglades where the anti-Castro Cubans in the Bay of Pigs operation had been trained. So, we're probably talking about a little overlap with like the kind of networks here. Especially, it's interesting that she started all this in 1960, which would have been like right as the Bay of Pigs. Like right before the Bay of Pigs happened, and then throughout the entire 60s with all these assassinations and things of that nature. And I see. Yeah, she trained at the now infamous Florida Center from which the invasion of Cuba, the Bay of Pigs, was choreographed. And actually, interestingly, that same Florida training facility was also used to prepare for the surprise parachute drop into the North Vietnamese prison camp of Son Toi in November 1970. The mission was a failure, for there were no American prisoners in the camp at the time of the raid. And this is kind of interesting in terms of her later quote-unquote operations. Candy claims to have almost played a role in that mission. It was arranged for her to lead a USO troop to Vietnam just prior to the attack. While in South Vietnam, she was to feign illness and leave the troop, and was to be transported by military helicopter to the North Vietnamese border, where she would deliver a message to an unidentified man. The USO tour was canceled at the last minute, and it is Candy's assumption that a leak originating at the highest level of the USO not only caused the tour to be canceled, but was responsible for the North Vietnamese evacuation of American prisoners from Son Toi only days before the attack on the prison camp. So that's a little weird. I don't know what her contribution to that operation would have been, but
it seems like it would have been mostly like delivering a message, which would make more sense for like her type of role. And being a courier, it would be valuable for someone to have their memories erased, if
for highly sensitive compartmentalized information. And so there was that, but then there was one time that she eventually recalled, which is one of the more upsetting memories that she had, and kind of is like the capstone of the book. And a little content warning here. This is pretty kind of disturbing and fucked up, but basically Jensen had her fly out to Virginia to go to like the farm, and then I guess either a facility at the farm or at CIA headquarters, and he brought her into a room that was like one of those medical observation rooms where there's like a surgery table and then there's like a gallery above it, where people sit down and watch. And so basically Nebel's bringing her back, and she's finally recounting this memory, and she's talking about nurses pushing her down, and she's like struggling in the bed. He says, "Where are you now?" She says, "Virginia." He says, at the big place, meaning CIA headquarters. Candy had referred to the Langley facility as the big place at a few occasions in the past. Candy replied. She sounded weary, almost drugged. Why did the nurses push you down? I don't know. I don't think they even knew who I was. Was Gil Jensen there? Dr. Jensen? Yes. And let's see. Nebel probed, and she told him she'd been present at a meeting at which Jensen displayed her to his colleagues. There were 8 subjects on the program, and Jensen scheduled Candy first. Being first is worse than being number 8, she moaned. Further questioning by Nebel brought the following comment from Candy. Quote, Gil said that there were those people in the room who could stand up and make all sorts of accusations, but if they were loyal Americans, their comments would be very valuable and would contribute to the case histories. Nebel asked Candy if she had spoken to the group, and she said she had. What did you say? He asked her. I told them they were all phonies, hoodwinkers. You told them that? And I told them not to be taken in by all of this. What did they do when you told them this? They applauded all of a sudden. It was funny. Did Jensen take a bow? No. Was he pleased with what you'd said? No. He asked me what I was trying to pull. I asked him who all the people were and what he was trying to pull. He had people all over the place. How many people were there? About 24. Nebel asked the purpose of her being there. Was he trying to prove what a success he was? Yeah, I think he was. Trying to prove it? I think he was successful. What name did he use for you and when he introduced you? Candy fumbled for a name as she tried to recall the incident. Finally, she said, something like Laura Quidnick, something like that, Laura something. Did you have on a wig? Which one? The black one. Nebel questioned her in an attempt to learn whether Jensen had done anything prior to introducing her to the group that might have acted to induce a hypnotic trance. He asked whether Jensen used his hands or held a watch on a chain or lighted a candle. A candle, Candy said. He held it down, low, very low. Her voice began to display anxiety. Did he light the candle? Yes. She was at the verge of tears as she recalled this moment from her fast. He lighted it in front of the people? Yes. I don't know. I don't know anything. What did Jensen say to you when the candle was lit? He asked me questions. I don't know. I don't. Nebel reinforced the trance at this point. As he did, Candy began to moan. She said, he tried to put the candle. He tried to. She began to cry, and basically they go back and forth on this, and Nebel has to like go really hard on the hypnosis and like demand that she tell him, and basically he placed the candle like in her vagina, basically in front of all these people, and I guess displayed no pain. And that was the point of this demonstration. And I guess in a later session, basically Arlene discussed the candle incident in a session with Nebel recorded on July 6, 1974. She said that some of the doctors at the seminar had tried to break through Jensen's control of Candy, but had failed, much to Jensen's satisfaction. Candy is perfect, Arlene told Nebel. Jensen proved in Virginia how impossible it was to break his control. So, yeah, I guess he brought all these CIA guys in and then did that to basically prove, but little disturbing factoid in there, she was the first of 8 that were going to be demonstrated.
I mean, highly, odd to do that. As we talked about, there was the established thing of, electrocuting the person, or, there's many other things that would occur to someone. So it seems like, relatedly to that, you had a note here about, an upsetting and worrisome pattern of satanic behavior on the part of Dr. Jensen. That almost seems like some kind of, ritual thing more than... That's what it would have to be. Doesn't seem, scientific. It's very sadistic. It would have to be some kind of, ritual purpose, you'd think.
It
right?
makes you wonder... Yeah, the candle. And I guess a candle was, one of the main triggers for her. Nebel said that at times there were certain restaurants or steakhouses they would go to in New York where if they had sort of low lit romantic flickering candles, he'd have to put a menu in front of it or something, because sometimes it would start to pull her into a trance and she would turn into Arlene, or just be in Candy in a trance. But basically that was a thing. So I don't know, with candles, incense, that's a little bit kind of spiritually, but could go either way, you know? It could be. Yeah. So it's there's something a little bit, satanic feeling, even though I think he's using it in the secular sense of just this guy has really bad motives. He also did mention at the very end that she did eventually recall various times when he made various kinds of sexual advances on her, which she always rejected, even in a hypnotic trance. And she postulated that kind of pissed him off after a while. That he basically, so maybe this is like as kind of close he could get to, you know, it's very twisted. But even Arlene was not sexually interested in him at all, and like refused any kind of advances he made. So obviously this is like a minefield in terms of like consent and like violating boundaries. Like
consent is out the window, but I mean, you would think like depending, like even if like there was no pain, I feel like John Nebel would be able to corroborate that story potentially, depending on what actually she meant, like, because that would cause.
Well, I mean, without getting too technical about it, I don't know exactly what. Like, if there's burn marks or something like that, it's definitely described in a way that it would have been incredibly painful, like you're being burned. And I guess I don't know. I mean, it might have happened. It might have been 10 years after it happened. I don't know. Other hypnotism specialists believe that something very bad happened to her during these incidents, and it seems like, I mean, also maybe the idea of a flame is that it's kind of the proof is right there. You know, there's no trickery that could be involved if you're burning somebody with an open flame. Whereas if you hook them up to electrodes, I don't know, like, even though this is all in the family, it's all in the company, but at the same
family, like, why would you? Yeah, exactly.
But also, like, well, maybe we don't have to overthink it. Like, he's proving that you can hold a candle up to any part of somebody's body and burn them, and they'll just stand there. Like, I mean, what more do you need than that? Like, that's, you know, it's like sadistic, but that's like what he was going for and what he wanted to show off, that I can make somebody even have this like superhuman strength kind of thing. And as I said, I think, they're bringing in 8 people. This sounds like it's, this is like a prototype. This is an experimental project. This isn't like we're going to send her out behind enemy lines to like, kill people on the Ho Chi Minh Trail or something, like assassinate a Soviet ambassador. But this is the kind of thing we have to work with now. Look at what we can do.
That's a lot, though. Putting someone's hand in a fire, maybe. That's kind of a prototypical thing, maybe.
What's the difference? Like what's what? I mean, one is more painful, but like, you're inflicting extreme pain on somebody, and they're hypnotized and not reacting to it. It seems like it's just the same thing. Like,
but it's a huge like difference for like social reasons. There's a huge like symbology to like.
Yeah, no, I agree, but I don't think any of that
would not be lost on anybody.
Yeah, but also, like, it doesn't... I don't see anything that makes me doubt this story, basically, is what I'm saying. Like, I mean, sure, like, there could be... It's interesting to speculate on kind of what the full, intent was behind it, or, like, why a candle was used versus something else, but I don't see any reason to doubt, given all the other information leading up to it. This seems perfectly natural. This guy was, like, a psychotic scientist who was abusing her and had hypnotized her to be able to ignore extreme pain and basically either feel pain when it wasn't really there or not feel pain when it really was there. But it doesn't seem wacky to me that like these people were so far down like a dark rabbit hole of manipulating human behavior. You just think of all these like CIA men like sitting up in the rafters, like applauding and like laughing and cackling, like chomping on their cigars or whatever, like thinking this is like fucking great. Like now we can have, hypnotized, female operatives, like honey trapping people or something, or super spies, like people that can never rat on the enemy. We'll never have that Korean War problem again where those, pilots who got shot down admitted they were dropping chemical weapons. It's like, I don't know. It makes sense. Like given what they're doing to her in general. I mean, they already tortured her, right? So it's definitely not off limits that like they're gonna hurt her, right?
Yeah, no, it's not off limits that they're gonna hurt her. And yeah, it's just like, I mean, yeah, and like, it's like possible, like what in a homosexual culture of men, like there's extreme, like, misogyny that, like, you know, could potentially be, but it is like very extreme, you know, it's definitely much more like, it's not part of like the normal demonstration of, like, you know, it's,
well, of course,
like, it's not like, I guess,
this isn't like a stage musician show of like, look, I can make you hop on one leg and bark like a dog. Like, of course,
demonstration of hypnosis, like in a government context.
But also, like, none of the MK Ultra experiments were normal by the standards of like legal medicine. You know, they were all like incredibly unethical and like violated every rule in the book. Like they, you know, they'd already like passed that plateau they passed that checkpoint a long time ago. Of just, you know, and they're bringing in, you know, they were bringing in Nazis, like Nazi, you know, concentration camp doctors.
There was like, you know, there are things like, you know, running like brothels and dosing people with, you know, psychedelic drugs and things like that, which, you know, is pretty extreme, but
but I mean, they're also, you know, they're giving LSD to children and electroshocking them until they forgot who they were. Like, they were doing really messed up experiments on people with like all kinds of drugs that definitely ruin people's lives. I don't think their intent with this experiment was to destroy Candy Jones. It was to show that basically, look how much control I have over her, that she's completely oblivious to pain.
I feel like there has to be something more to it than just that.
Well, okay. I mean, how about we yes and this? Like, yes, they did the candle thing as a like sadistic demonstration of like the power of like the hypnoprogramming, but also maybe there was something even darker going on.
Well, I don't know. Well, I won't commit to saying they did the candle thing. I trust her, like, you know, on the basis, like, you know, I'll like err on the side of trusting her account. But if they did the candle thing, there's something more to it than that. That's like literally like, you know, an Anton.
What is it about the candle thing that's sticking in your craw that doesn't feel right? That doesn't add up.
Because it's like, it's just completely like, you know, outside it really is like abnormal even by these standards. It's very abnormal to use it's just that very unusual to do that. To, like, because it would do permanent damage, you know, like it's burning, it's ritual, like, burning of, like, someone's genitals, like, it's, you know, it's not just, like, demonstrative at all. The idea that it's just to demonstrate how people can endure pain, that's not the only purpose of that. That would cause sexual trauma, for sure, whether you were hypnotized or not, like, no doubt about it. Just that.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, there's also the possibility they put it in the other way, you know, I don't want to get too into it, but you know what I mean? Where then, you know, there'd still be heat and the wax burns you and stuff like that, but it's like more of it's like, it's still like a very traumatic, violating thing that probably
then
hurts
that is
or
still
whatever.
Like this, you know, like, well, like what you just described, I think is really something where it's like this crazy, like, burlesque show that's happening, like, I don't know. I'm just saying, like, that is,
And I mean, also, it should be mentioned that, like, she absolutely, it wasn't easier. It also wasn't, if you read, like, the transcript or the recreation of the transcript, it is such a difficult thing to get out of her to admit, like, what Jensen did. And then once she admits it, she, like, bursts into tears and has like a total breakdown, and like she's obviously like more traumatized by that than any other thing that she remembers happening. So and they did torture her, at least presumably, or they made her think she was being tortured in Taiwan, and that also was a very traumatic experience. So I mean, I get that it's like weirder and it's far out and it's bizarre.
It's weirder than like your standard, like, you know.
But these are a bunch of fucking sickos. These are fucking sickos, man. I don't know what to, like, you know what I mean? Like the whole thing they're doing is basically deeply twisted. And I think in his case, he did start to get more angry with her when she repeatedly refused any of his like sexual advances. Reminds me of The Fury and all those psychic teenagers, how it was like de rigueur for the older woman, and then John Cassavetes to like start a sexual relationship with these like 16-year-olds to like kind of get them under their thumb a little bit and kind of like emotionally manipulate them. And, you know, if she was resistant to that, he got a little pissy and was like, maybe there was something personal in him that like, but I mean, obviously it had to have been the thing where if he did it, all the old boys that were watching, all these CIA dudes would have thought they're like reacted like they're at a bachelor party in Tijuana instead of, you know, what the fuck are you doing? Like, this is insane. You know, like whatever it was, they seemed to be. And I hear you on that. Like, it really makes you beg the question of like, how twisted are all these people just sitting around like watching this and thinking it's awesome? Like, presumably they knew, I don't know, maybe they didn't recognize her, but like maybe some of them would have. I mean, she was a little older, but she was a famous pinup girl, and a lot of these guys might have been World War II veterans. Maybe they had Candy Jones's pinup in their locker or whatever. But then, you know, so like the level of twistedness of like, I don't know, it's like seeing today, like having like Ariana Grande like go to CIA headquarters and like everyone's sitting around like ha ha ha, like making her do stuff. And, you know, it's like hard to wrap your head around unless there's like, you know, this is a very compartmentalized like kind of division within the CIA, and all, and this is just normalized. Like, like kind of a cult, basically. Like this is like cremation of care type shit, and they're just like ha 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 ha. You know, because if you think about it, like the ramifications of this, with it kind of makes sense that the most evil people would be the most excited about harnessing this type of technology, because like what we can literally like hypnotize slaves who just like won't even ever like raise their hand against us or, you know, flinch if we like abuse them. I feel like for a lot of like psycho type people in this milieu, like that sounded like a kind of like heaven to them. And at the very least, it was, you know, the silver bullet maybe against the commies or something like that. But yeah, it's dark, it's bizarre. And I mean, not as bizarre as some of the things we heard in the Franklin scandal with some of those foster children, right? I mean, I think we can agree.
No, not like, well, some of that, what they described was like quite, you know, like cannibalism, things like that.
Yeah. Which again, it brings back around to thinking about like what kind of things could you achieve by hypnotizing or drugging a child and then convincing them through various forms of trickery.
Of hypnosis in by some of the Franklin some of the Franklin kids who came forward also had some hang-ups around hypnosis. I want to say Alicia Owen, like someone offered to hypnotize her, and she was very averse to the idea, which was a little bit interesting.
I do remember that. Yeah. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention is like just a bizarro coincidence is that when she finally met Marshall Berger, you know, when she started doing all this, she actually had met him before, and this is very bizarre because he just so happens to have been the first person to ever hypnotize Candy Jones in 1946, right after she got back from New York. I believe it was right around the time she got married to Harry Conover, but he did a hypnosis session with her over the phone because he was in Chicago. And I forget what it was. It was just about like anxiety or sleep or something like that. And I think they only talked on the phone once, but another very bizarre thing that like, oh, he just so happened to be the guy that you got referred to like hypnotize you over the phone. There's a lot of evidence here. She also believes that maybe Dr. Jensen was injecting her with various drugs, which he claimed even back in 1945 were vitamin shots when she was in the hospital in the Philippines when he first met her. And so it's conceivable, at least, that if he was already kind of on to this like tip of research, that he became aware of Candy Jones' excellent like hypnotizability back in 1945, and then basically, I don't know, maybe referred her to Marshall Berger, his superior, and then realized like years later, oh, what about Candy Jones? You know, she scored a 5 on whatever the normative scale of suggestibility was I think it's called the hypnotic induction profile. Yeah, the HIP, developed by Dr. Herbert Spiegel, and she was a 5 out of 5, which I guess is the rarest and most suggestible of them all. And so it's like, how long did they have her kind of have their eye on her, and were, I don't know. It's very creepy to think about.
They definitely knew beforehand, like long in advance. Like in 1945, he was the guy who treated her in the Philippines. So but did you, before we fully wrap up, did you want to mention that sort of suicide connection that you were thinking of? Yeah.
We'll wrap up here, but I just noticed this in one of the last chapters, and I hadn't known it before, and it's too perfect, and it blows my mind, and it makes me 100% believe this whole story. But basically, after the being taken out to Langley and stuff, her relationship with Dr. Jensen started to fray, and she started talking more and more about stopping working for the CIA and how she didn't want to do it anymore. And I guess this was increasingly worrying Jensen, because if, she stopped seeing him and stopped working for him, who knows? One day she could be at the dentist and get a sedative and then remember everything and start blabbing about it. And, in short, she was maybe becoming a potential liability for Dr. Jensen. So one of the things that Nebel discovered in a lot of different regression sessions was Candy talking about hurting herself, or Arlene talking about Candy hurting herself. And this idea of committing suicide, which, like, the further Nebel kind of probed into it, it felt like this had been a suggestion that had been implanted in her by Dr. Jensen. And so that is, in fact, what he eventually sussed out. And she was able to remember that around 1972, when the relationship with Jensen was starting to fray, and this would have been like right before she happened to meet Long John Nebel, who I guess inadvertently maybe kind of saved her from this, because basically there was a trip that Dr. Jensen wanted to send her on to the Bahamas. And she ended up not taking this trip because she met Dr. John Nebel and got swept up in a whirlwind romance, and then got married, and then, all this stuff happened, and she never went on another mission again. But what apparently she remembered, I'll just read it here. That in yet another hypnotic session, also undated, Nebel was to learn more about Jensen's suicide plans for Candy. In this instance, he was filled in by Arlene. The session opened with Arlene preparing to leave on a mission, as instructed by Jensen. She was in Miami during the regression, and she told Nebel that Candy had traveled to Miami, but once there, Arlene had been instructed to take over, which she had. So here's the transcript. John says, "Do you like Candy?" Arlene says insolently, "With almonds." "Are you brave, Arlene?" "Not brave, just stupid and strong and fast." "Isn't Candy strong?" "She's strong, but not as fast as me." "Did Jensen ever suggest to you that you commit suicide?" He can't get rid of me that fast. I won't let her, or him." "Well, if Candy dies, you're dead." "Candy doesn't know that." "Do you think Candy would ever kill herself?" "It's not called killing. It's stopping what is." "What does that mean?" Condescendingly, "It means stopping the progression of a positive action." "That doesn't make any sense." Annoyed, "It's the stopping of movement." "You mean death?" "Yes, of course." "Would you like to be dead, Arlene?" "I am." "If you're dead, how can you talk?" "Why don't you die and find out?" And, I guess that would... So she basically said, she said later that Arlene told him that Candy was in very deep trouble with Jensen, and Jensen was looking for Candy. He asked, what will Jensen do if he finds Candy? Make her commit suicide? No, Arlene replied, but Candy might kill herself. She might. And then here's the real money shot. So finally, after multiple sessions, more details of Jensen's plan to have Candy commit suicide resurfaced. It was to occur in December of 1972. Jensen had booked a first-class seat for her on Pan Am to Nassau, the Bahamas. She would check into the Paradise Beach Hotel, where she'd been a frequent visitor over the years as Candy Jones, but Arlene Grant would meet her there. That was part of Jensen's plan. He told Candy she would receive a call during her second day on the island. She asked him who would be calling her, but he refused to tell her. I assume it was to be Jensen himself who would call, and his call would cause Arlene to take over from Candy and guide her to a steep bluff overlooking the sea. Arlene would make the high dive, just as she had done when they were children, and it would be over for Candy Jones. Did you know that Arlene planned to kill you in the Bahamas? Nebel asked Candy during a session in 73. Yes. What had you done to make her angry with you? It's all too complicated, Candy replied. I was told to meet her there. Where? The Bahamas, the Paradise Beach Hotel. When did this happen? Nebel asked. Last November. That's when I was told. Nebel asked Arlene about the incident during a regression that took place in their apartment on an unspecified date. Candy is just a dragnet around your neck, Arlene told Nebel, but she needed you. She had all the time in the world to go to Paradise Island in December and take the high dive, but she married you. If Candy killed herself, Arlene, you'd be dead too. Oh no, replied Arlene. I'd be the one who survived. Jensen had persuaded Arlene of that. And okay, so rewind real quick, because as soon as I saw Nassau, Bahamas, Paradise Island, Paradise Beach Hotel, and then I saw it called Paradise Island, the sus alarms in my head just started like screeching, basically. And I looked it up to see if she was referring to the same exact thing. And yes, indeed, Jensen had her go to Paradise Island, the home of Resorts International, the Mafia CIA joint venture money laundromat, reportedly set up by Alan Dulles and Meyer Lansky in the 1950s, that was purchased by none other than former Cheeto-in-Chief Donald J. Trump in 1987.
Best known for the sprawling resort Atlantis.
Yes, now owned by Saul Kersner, who's a apartheid-era, like a Zionist South African mafia-connected real estate magnate. Finally, Atlantis, I think, took over that. Yeah. So Paradise Island is Resorts International, like right out of Mark Lombardi's unfinished Interlock. So if you wanted your CIA hypnoprogrammed asset to go commit suicide, what better place to go than the CIA's very own resort island, right?
I guess, yeah.
That to me is like a smoking gun. Nobody knew about. Also, the idea that anybody could infer that this could be a detail that was worked in there because of an association with CIA, that this was virtually unknown in like the 1970s, that Paradise Island Resorts International was like a hub of CIA and mafia activity. It's not very well known today, for that matter, but this is like that's a deep cut right there. That like they're gonna send you to the CIA island of the Bahamas that's totally corrupt, and then you're gonna jump off a cliff, and then we're not gonna have any problems about it.
Yeah, there's a couple details like that that's what I think, like, the story gains the most credence from, is there's not like, I don't know if that's like, if she had said like, we have like a base there or something, like, or we have like then that would be like more of a smoking gun. There's a couple of circumstantial things like that where like it seems like things that didn't really come to light until after this whole story do have like or sort of corroborated or sort of foreseen in the story. Like there are aspects of the actual MK Ultra stuff that wasn't really known that does kind of come through. I'm a little on the fence with this one. Just like one thing that like I find it like odd how like he leads her kind of in hypnosis, like, and asks her like, did they have this, like sort of yes or no questions, like, giving her kind of like you can kind of see like there's a collaborative aspect to the storytelling in some ways, but I'm on the fence for those two reasons. More so, like, that's one thing that like kind of like but there are some things that circumstantially make me think like she did kind of foresee this thing or in advance, and this does line up with other things that we know about this type of phenomenon.
I mean, we're talking about basically these are things that started coming out in 1973. So Watergate was going on at that time, but the revelations about MK Ultra, mind control research, that was still at least like a year or two away from coming out. Mm-hmm. Like probably 1975 to 77 were the peak years where these revelations hit. And this book came out in the middle of it, but the regression stuff and the stuff that Long John Nebel was doing was
long before,
in 73, and there was really no reason. It even does note in the book that at first when she brought up things about the FBI or the CIA, he wasn't like us, where we would have been like, what? You know, like he was kind of like, he got into like CIA conspiracy stuff kind of later on in like the 70s and going into the 80s, I guess, but he didn't particularly see it as like, oh wow, like, oh, he just thought, there's something weird going on. So so I noticed that, and I think Bain kind of mentions that, you know, even though obviously this isn't necessarily the perfect person you want doing a hypnotic regression, because he's her husband and he kind of has like a really subjective stake in this, he really didn't lead her that much in the beginning and would kind of let her, he tried not to like really force her, except then later when she was recalling when he was really sold on, you know, this entire thing, I think he tried to press her more on like specifics and stuff. But a lot of these things came up. He says a lot of the details that were first laid out really came about kind of spontaneously, and a lot of times Nebel did not always put her in a trance. Sometimes she slipped into it and then he would just kind of roll with it and ask her questions, but he wasn't necessarily always putting her in the trance. So he did sometimes later to kind of get more information and stuff like that, but a lot of times it would just happen spontaneously. So I don't know. I think overall, I think of the whole, you know, later on, I think the USO angle is also something that is really interesting. We haven't talked as much about Bryce Taylor's Thanks for the Memories, which I read. I feel like I read most of it like 7 or 8 years ago or something like that. But one of the big antagonists in that one is Bob Hope, the comedian, who was very well known for being like Mr. USO. He did USO tours all throughout his life and everything. Right. Mm-hmm. And you will also remember who was the head of the USO in World War II when all these sketchy fools were roaming around. Do you remember?
Ronald Reagan, right?
No. Ronald Reagan probably worked for the USO. No, it was Prescott Bush.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was.
Ronald Reagan
Prescott
was
Bush.
in the USO at one point, right?
Yeah. No, he was in the USO.
Or he did like some USO movie.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, there were multiple
this is the
movies.
Army.
Yeah, this is the Army. Mm-hmm. It's just, but you know, then you think about USO, like Bob Hope, and like I think a big thing in Bryce Taylor's book is like the USO is kind of a front for like using these kind of, you know, beta sex operatives and stuff like that, and I don't know. It's like very, you know, it also kind of reminds me of, just taking it full circle, that deleted portion of Apocalypse Now Redux where they have a USO show with a bunch of Playboy playmates, and then like they start like the young men are like so insane and like sex crazed, they like start a riot and like tear down the stage, and the women have to be like evacuated by helicopter. It is interesting. I don't know what you think, if you think this is like a real thing, but the fact that this was published by Playboy Press is an intriguing kind. It's kind of like Hustler publishing like JFK conspiracy stuff. It's like, what were you guys like?
Well, they also, I remember during the Mothman episode, during my research for the Mothman episode, reading that they had like, you know, they were kind of, they dipped their toes into this stuff. I remember they had like they almost published like a big write-up on UFOs by John Keel, like the definitive article on UFOs, you know, so they were kind of, you know, in the same way that National Enquirer like now is sort of like a tabloid, but like they were associated with the paranormal for a while. Kind of like that type of stuff. I don't know, for whatever reason.
Yeah, they were a repository for more edgy kind of countercultural writing. I guess, you know, as the old cliche goes, oh, I just buy Playboy for the articles, you know. But I guess they did have. Yeah. But it's just like it's kind of like I don't know if it's like a weird shit coding thing of like, if we put it in Playboy, then it's not going to have quite the same like level of legitimacy that it would in like, you know, The Nation or something like that.
Yeah, the
I'm
nation
not really
might not have wanted to take it on, though. You know, like,
exactly.
Like, you know, you could say it both ways. You know, maybe it's to their
and it makes me want just the whole like the Playboy bunnies, the Hugh Hefner being like this mega pimp kind of person that is totally respected, but then also has this like counterculture cred. He's got all the Laurel Canyon celebrities are hanging out in his grotto, you know, and he's got like this harem of little like bunnies who sound a lot like the kind of, you know, the stereotype of like the beta sex kitten, though of course he could just be coasting off of the fumes of like fame, celebrity, bunnies, and like and pimp techniques, basically. Like, you know, he's doing what any kind of you know, brothel owner or pimp or, you know, somebody like that would do. But it's interesting that they would kind of like co-sign this project. And also just to mention, because I think my first thought when I discovered this, like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, I was really looking around for like, you know, books that could be like adapted into screenplays at the time that I would want to write. And I was getting into all this like dark stuff. And when I first read about this, it was like, oh my, like, why isn't this a movie? And oh my God, like this would be a great film potentially. And it turns out like I'm obviously not the only person that thought that. It says right here on the back of the book that, and I did read this at the time, which kind of gave me like a pit in my gut a little bit. The 20th Century Fox paid significant money for the rights to this book as a film vehicle for Jane Fonda, Comrade Jane, Hanoi Jane, yet never produced the movie, despite attempts at screenplays by 3 of Hollywood's best, and Fox has refused to sell the rights to the many producers who've expressed interest in making the film. Why? The CIA attempted to suppress the book, as did one of the doctors, a physician to the stars, who spearheaded the intelligence agency's mind control experimentation. So, okay, so a physician to the stars. What did we say right at the beginning? I don't know if it was or Kroger. I guess we still. It was William S. Kroger or his partner, who. So either Marshall Berger or Dr. Gilbert Jensen, and one of them was William S. Kroger in real life. Apparently, I don't know if I buy the whole thing about William J. Bryan not being involved, because it almost sounds like a kind of thing you would implant to like, you're never going to remember this guy because he's like too important, and like he's obviously identifiable because he's like 300 pounds. You know what I mean? He's got like a huge personality. It's very memorable. Why don't we just like, maybe there's some other scientists that were like involved that, or I don't know. Like, I mean, it seems like they could really suggest a lot of things to her. Maybe they could suggest her on an even deeper level to like never remember this guy. Like, you do not know him at all. Like, you've never heard of him, etc. Which is, like we said, weird because he has the name of a very prominent politician, or, you know, almost the same name as like a famous, you know, political figure that people probably still would have somewhat remembered, even if only from like Inherit the Wind and the Snopes monkey trial or whatever, or the Scopes monkey trial. Sorry, I said Snopes because, you know, they were debunking stuff in that. But, you know, I don't know. I definitely want to look more into these doctors now, because I will say as a final thing, like, you know, I was able to buy this book for, I don't know, $25 online. They reprinted it in 2002. So there's 2 runs of it. It's not so bad like some books, like Esther Brooks' hypnotism book on Amazon, which I think is hundreds of dollars, and you can't find a PDF of it anywhere. There is no way to find a PDF of the CIA's control of Candy Jones. Like, I looked everywhere, right? Like, we're pretty, without incriminating ourselves, we're pretty good at sourcing written information through various avenues.
I think this is just something that people haven't scanned for whatever. I think that it did exist, but they've definitely. I did see a couple things where it's like there was a PDF of it at one point, but it's been removed for whatever reason. So I don't know. Maybe people have scanned it or had a copy at one point, but it's become unavailable. So there's another point in favor of the story. Oh, another thing that did jump out at me was the connection between the FBI, the sort of seamless movement from the FBI to the CIA in the story, which does kind of go along with, you know, a lot of the material that we have about Esther Brooks is from the FBI, you know, and that was who he was communicating with a lot of the time, in addition to Navy intelligence. So it kind of does bridge the gap between those two things. I mean, they're both like famous alphabet agencies, like, but you know, it is. Those both were interested in this. You know, it's not like the FBI had no interest in it. I mean, despite their failure to communicate on 9/11.
Right. I mean,
like communication.
See, that's kind of funny that we, like, for the last 20 years. We've all been inculcated with this meme that the intelligence agencies like don't talk to each other. And in like some respects, that's true. There's always bureaucratic turf wars, and there's a lot of stovepiping of intelligence and compartmentalization. Even whole divisions of the CIA don't know what other divisions of the CIA are doing and all that. But to say that they absolutely like did not interact, and I think particularly in this hot Cold War period of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, that they did collaborate a lot, because of course the CIA is not technically, per its charter, allowed to operate on American soil, but now we know they were absolutely infesting. They were all over the place. But maybe sometimes, especially for kind of introductions to maybe recruiting somebody for government work, you might start with the FBI because that's feels appropriate, you know, because FBI is domestic, you know, law enforcement, and CIA is foreign. And then once you're kind of like taken into the FBI fold, then they can like pass you off over, just like how, you know, the CIA sheep dipped people, like maybe Oswald, into the U.S. military, but they were actually CIA operatives. And there's definitely FBI people. There's people that have jumped that line from FBI to CIA back and forth over the course of their career, depending on what they needed to get accomplished. So,
it's definitely like a unique and interesting tale. Mm-hmm. And there are just like there's just a couple of things that like one interesting tidbit from John Mark's work is that he did an interview with Milton Klein, who was like another pretty famous hypnotist, who, you know, and like a theorist and of hypnosis and of hypnotherapy, who I guess died in 2004. But he said to John Marks in an interview that like evidence really does exist that has not been published, that, you know, you could make a Manchurian candidate. You know, you really could. Maybe we should do an episode about John Mark's book, like, at some point, you know, because it really
that was the first one to come out and explore this kind of idea. And and I think, I forget if he got into Sirhan in that book at all.
I think that he did get into it.
There's just on the thing of, you know, just hypno assassins, whatever, in the introduction, which was written
Mind Control, I'm thinking of.
Oh, Operation Mind Control. But in the introduction, they note in passing, I actually didn't know this, that, well, they do say, one of the physicians. Okay, now this is interesting too, because even though he said William J. Bryan had nothing to do with Candy Jones, the introduction, who I think was written by somebody else, it might have been Dr. Herbert C. No, this is written by Bain, but I think it's the 2002 introduction. He says, one of the physicians who oversaw the experiments on Candy was also involved with Sirhan prior to his shooting RFK. And on top of that, it's been documented that James Earl Ray was hypnotized in Los Angeles 2 months prior to allegedly killing Martin Luther King. Mere coincidences without probative value? Perhaps. Then again. So, okay, who's this physician that was doing work on Sirhan before he shot RFK, who was also overseeing experiments on Candy? Was that Berger, perhaps? You know, was it William J. Bryan? I don't know, because he says that, you know, she insists. I wonder if he put that in there for legal reasons. That, like, saying that, like, him and you and all your fat friends are trying to hypnotize me. And he was like, oh, shit, that's going to be, like, way too obviously a reference to William J. Bryan. So I'm going to put this thing in here to swerve away from that and not get totally sued. I don't know. I wonder if Donald Bain's still alive. The other great Bain in our on our bookshelf.
Yeah, the other. Yeah, you know? I keep thinking of S.K. Bain. Yeah. Maybe
if he's still around, maybe we'll get him on and talk. one day.
Yeah, maybe. We could do the two Bains in conversation on these
that'd be
topics.
Great. That'd be great.
We would host that, Congress. So
I also don't know if 20th Century Fox is ever going to give up those movie rights, but pick me, Fox. Oh wait, no. Oh my God.
I will work for free.
Yeah, I will work for free. Wait, hold on. I just realized something horrible. It's not Fox anymore. It's Disney. We're never seeing that movie. We're never seeing that movie. It's going to the Disney Vault forever.
We'll see the techniques, outlined in the book implemented. We'll see it in a way.
Every day.
Yes. Maybe if there was like some superhero angle you could put on it, like, she was hypnotized to be like a superhero, like.
I think that was like in like one of the Captain America movies. Isn't like his buddy get basically like hypnoprogrammed into being like a fascist mercenary or something?
Dude, I don't know.
I don't know.
He's like, of course, the Winter Soldier is like programmed by Russians or something, right? Like,
exactly.
It was the Russians that did it.
Yeah, it was always the Russians. Yeah, exactly.
Because the Winter Soldier seems like a Russian guy.
It sounds like a Russian. It does, just cold, dead, soulless. So that's that. I think we can.
Bucky was revived in Moscow, but suffered brain damage with amnesia, and he got a bionic arm. This is the Wikipedia article on Winter Soldier, aka Bucky Barnes. Cool. All very fucking cool.
Well, it actually is all around the media. If you think about like the Bourne Identity, it's literally this, but he's like an actual commando.
It is like a super common media trope. Like, I was watching like spoilers for like the shitty new Star Trek show that you shouldn't watch because it's like a waste of time. But there's like a sleeper agent plot line in that. It's like, it's a trope, so it's like not like the idea of it, like Manchurian Candidate is like a cultural phenomenon, really, like this even goes back to like the Hashashin, like the whole idea of like brainwashed assassins,
mind controlled black assassins.
So it's not like this is something that was like beyond the pale, like to have these notions, but there are like they got caught like doing this exact stuff, and there are certain things that do seem to line up, or at least could like fit this the pattern that we know. So
yes.
Like,
you know what?
Yeah, and it is like an interesting like indication of that kind of like the Hollywood like connection, the sort of like Vigilant Citizen style like BSK thing, like with her being visible.
And I'm not convinced that we've like fully mapped out that hell yet, but I feel like we're getting a little bit closer, because now I'm thinking of even more ways and subtler ways that you could, like, if like this, whoever this guy was, who was a physician to the stars, is the guy who was programming Candy Jones. That opens up a very disturbing world of possibilities of, well, who were his famous clients? And, I even remember a kind of one of those earlier like Obama era kind of conspiracy stories that kind of floated around on like Reddit or something. And I'll see if I could look it up one day. It was like it alleged that Obama had some kind of spiritual advisor throughout his 2008 campaign. And like somebody saw him before he gave his like, I guess, big speech. I want to say, I think it was 2008 when he like gave out to give his big acceptance speech for the nomination, that like he went in a room with like the spiritual advisor, and then he came out and he looked like he was in a trance. And then he went out and like totally like killed it and like brought the house down. And so like, is Obama like got some weird NLP like handler that like trances him into being into like full Obama mode, so that he just goes out and gives like this soaring kind of rhetoric with all of his like his kind of NLP-ish cadence of how he spoke and all that, and just other people too, like athletes and stuff, like Tom Brady talking about like the witch rituals that Giselle Bundchen does for him, like before games. Like she does like sus shamanic rituals on like an altar and stuff. And you know, like how, I mean, these people are all about being the best. Also, I can't remember if I mentioned it in the last thing we did about Tiger Woods and how he was, you know, he was brought up since a baby to play golf, and you know, was actually, there's a clip because I watched the HBO documentary, there's a clip of him on the fucking Bob Hope show, like hitting golf balls when he's 2. And I was just like, oh my God,
Wow.
no. His dad was a Green Beret involved in covert operations in Vietnam. He did 2 tours, was a demolitions expert, like going behind enemy lines. And he would bring him to the Navy golf course in Orange County to teach him how to play golf as a child. And when Tiger was in middle school, he brought in a Navy psychologist to hypnotize him. And multiple people, even in this very normie documentary, said that sometimes like Tiger Woods seemed to be in a trance when he was playing. And so perhaps he was taught to self-hypnotize or something along those lines.
Well, I mean, yeah, like a lot of people will say that like when an athlete like is at his
in the zone,
top of his game, you know, he's in flow. Yeah, exactly. He's in the zone, you know, which is, that's like if we're postulating like William Joseph Bryan as like the hypnotist in this case, like that basically was his like whole philosophy of hypnosis. And I think that really is kind of like the best way to think about it is something that like isn't like this mysterious power or something, but kind of like a concept used to organize like a bunch of different ways of like the interaction between the mind and like the, you know, reality and things like that.
Especially in the place of the entertainment industry, which is like so predicated upon faking it till you make it, basically, that this becomes an incredibly alluring technique for a lot of people.
With the whole recent like Harry and Meghan thing, you know, I remember like hearing Harry and like someone being like, well, you know, you look so happy like in this picture, and like one of them being like, well, you know, like we have,
I wanted to die,
smiles like when we go out, yeah, exactly, like she's like literally suicidal, you know, according to her account, but she like, you know, has this, even, you know, she's, I mean, I guess she is an actress and everything, but both of them like were able to just be all smiles no matter how bleak things are, you know, so absolutely, like, and you have to like, you know, or even like if you like are in a movie that sucks and like you hate it and it's an awful experience, like Joss Whedon like sexually assaulted you or something, you have to get out there and be like, it's the best experience, like what a groundbreaking like new version of like the Avengers 5 or whatever, you know, like it was just amazing to work on this, you know, and just like talk up and praise someone who like so
it's are there elements of like self-hypnosis at play even in that?
Well, sure, like even like, you know, even if you're just like relax, like just breathe, like, you know, I'm just gonna go out there, like, you know, like doing that type of thing, like that, like that's pretty much like a form of hypnosis, right? Like what, you know, in a way,
a subtle form.
Prayer is. Yeah,
it is. Apparently, it's true. It's medically it's apparently it's medically verifiable that like if you are feeling anxious and you take like 3 or 4 like very deep breaths in a row, that like it will like chill you out physiologically.
Yeah, that would make sense to me. Yeah.
Exactly. You know, so we have I guess, you know, our bodies our minds are very powerful things over our bodies.
They definitely are. Yes.
And you know, how much of like maybe what you would call like any kind of performative excellence in a child is being held back by their psychological hang-ups or fears or anxieties or things like that. That's why it's kind of interesting. Candy Jones looked at Arlene as like this super person that was so much better, but maybe actually that's just like Candy Jones at her optimized ability, and then her fears and anxieties and other things of kind of her main conscious personality are kind of holding her back a little bit from tapping into that. So you can see with like a pop singer, an athlete, an actor, how, you know, if you tell them they could get to that place of maximum potential, you know, operating at their absolute maximum, you know, that who wouldn't want that in this kind of system? where everything's so precarious, and the drive to be the best. The system usually draws people that naturally, for whatever reason, need to be the best. Want to rise to the absolute top, and whatever tools you could give them. And maybe this is kind of thing that's like an occulted medical technology that is not emphasized and rolled out to the masses because it gives people who are in the know a competitive edge.
When Marianne Williamson will say something like, I don't know, maybe, but it's kind of like Marianne Williamson will say we can use our minds, or through positive thinking or whatever, be like, what, you're anti-vax, or whatever, shut up, so it's kind of like this thing where suggesting that prayer could have any positive or material effect, that is absolutely religious and must be completely rejected from just cast out completely from the sphere of acceptable discourse. The notion that this that is not it's not our value, it is not a value, whatever, it is not so it can't be accepted. And I mean it is we should wrap up, but one thing that I did think of while dealing with you were talking earlier was the actor and the sort of teacher of acting, Michael Chekhov, who worked with Marilyn Monroe. He was Russian, and he had and he actually played in the Hitchcock movie, which was actually called Spellbound, a psychiatrist. That was his one really famous role. But he was really known for being a teacher of Stanislavski's method and other stuff, and kind of helping actors to create their own sort of inner persona and stuff like that, and he kind of helped Marilyn Monroe to create the image of Marilyn Monroe and things like that, so this type of he worked with a bunch of people like Clint Eastwood, who
was at, according to Alex Jones, was at Bohemian Grove. He saw him there.
No.
Yep.
So he apparently he had something called the psychological gesture from symbolism. And he was very into spiritualism and things like that. So it might be an interesting connection.
That is interesting. We should do a whole we should do a whole Marilyn Monroe thing one day. I think there's her employment at Lookout Mountain Air Force Base. I mean, according to I believe that Kathy O'Brien, and Bryce Taylor both pointed to Marilyn Monroe as an early rollout prototype of maybe the type of person that they made Candy Jones into. Mm-hmm. And that, so she, whenever they talk about beta sex kitten kind of thing, the happy birthday Mr. President thing always comes up, and, she's having affairs with JFK and Bobby and mobsters, and, going to Lookout Mountain Air Force Base doing God knows what, and then died under these really mysterious circumstances. Right. It does make you think a little bit. It does make you think.
Right. She would definitely be. Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to read, because I don't think we mentioned it, and it's kind of it's one of the rare pieces of evidence, and that is the phone message that was left on Candy Jones' voicemail on July 3rd, 1973, 6 months after she married Long John Nebel. And so this is the closest thing maybe to a smoking gun that she was working under the alias of Arlene Grant for the CIA. So basically on July 3rd, 1973, the following message was left on the telephone answering machine in their apartment. Quote, Japan Airlines calling on the 03 July at 4:10 p.m. Please have Miss Grant call 759-9100. She is holding now reservation on Japan Airlines Flight 5 for the 6th of July, Kennedy, Tokyo, with an open on to Taipei. This is per Cynthia that we are calling. Thank you. And so they got that weird message out of nowhere, and many people they called up to check, and the number was from Japan Airlines, so it was a real call. And but the trip was never taken, so there's no record in the airline's computer of who made the reservation for Miss Grant. And nobody really knows what per Cynthia means, but people they talk to who worked in airlines have said that Cynthia sounds like the code name for organization. And, Bain cannot help but speculate that were I with the CIA looking for such a code, Cynthia would be my hands-down choice for a word to indicate CIA, because you can't spell Cynthia without CIA. So,
that's
hey,
true.
Take from that what you will, but that's enough for me. I'm pretty convinced they did this, and good for Candy Jones and Long John Nebel.
They went on. Was that before they went on the radio with this, or after?
That's a good question.
Obviously, it would be much more impressive if it were before. So
yes, it would. That's a good good question. I don't actually know when she. No, I don't know the exact date when she started going public on, or if it was in like 1974 when she finally started doing it. Yeah, I don't know. I think she had already started working there, but she hadn't actually maybe started. I don't know. We're going to have to punt on that. I forget exactly. Flipping through the book now. But you're right. It would be extremely... I think it's still interesting because it would still hypothetically require somebody from Japan Airlines to like crank call her or for her to arrange. You go down that rabbit hole again of like, oh, it would have to all be an elaborate hoax. But it is more impressive. It is more impressive overall. And I think even if she had started, because this is 6 months after she married him, I think she had just started doing the regression session, so they might not have even gotten to like Arlene Grant and I don't even know if Nebel knew about that yet. But they do have a tape. They did preserve the tape of it.
They called
so
them
they
up,
have
and
it.
there was like no Cynthia at Japan Airlines or something, right? But you said it was really from them.
The phone number that was called from that like showed up on their phone bill was the actual Japan Airlines reservations number, and the flight they were referring to was a real flight that was taking off like 3 days later, and so all that information checked out, except of course, why are they calling her Miss Grant? And who is Cynthia? And, I guess, she never was able to hold on to her passport, the Arlene Grant passport, because Dr. Jensen had it. But, that is sort of the sole. There's anecdotal evidence of like friends who, like I said, who, said she told them that she was working for a government agency and she was traveling outside of the country. And she actually wrote, I think, a letter maybe to like her life insurance company or maybe her attorney, informing them sometime in the 1960s that sometimes when she's traveling that she uses the aliases Arlene Grant and Jessica Wilcox, which is her birth name, and that because she was worried that if she died under any kind of circumstance or anything happened to her and she was traveling under the Arlene Grant passport, that it might mess up her life insurance payouts to her children. So she does have that corroborating piece of evidence of like telling her, I don't know, either attorney or life insurance provider that, sometimes she goes by the alias of Arlene Grant when, ostensibly that name hadn't really been used since her childhood with her imaginary friend. And, it's like in her conscious life, she didn't run around necessarily, or maybe, she thought she was just doing this fully consciously, but using this alias from her childhood and that it was all her idea. But actually, Dr. Jensen, kind of was programming her, leading her along to do it. So I think either way, it's a good piece, a good little nugget of evidence.
Yeah, definitely. And so is like, just the the idea of the passport, which I guess maybe Bain did see, or was it just something that she intimated that she had like the passport of her like wearing a wig? Did she still have that at the time that Bain was interviewing her?
Not the time that Bain was around. I can't remember if some of her friends or acquaintances ever saw it, but she said that when it was kept by Dr. Jensen, as was her like wig and outfit. So he would go there, she would get her vitamin shots, and then he would give her the wig and the outfit and the dark makeup and give her her passport and drive her straight to the airport and send her to Taiwan or wherever. So, and then when she would return, he'd do the same thing. He would inject her, bring her back to Candy Jones, and then confiscate the passport and the wig and stuff like that. So she wasn't able to hold on to those things.
Just, like, maybe, you know, it was just, like, good fortune, like, rather than the idea that, like, you know, he, like, by virtue of his interests, like, of John Nebel's interests, you know, it seems like a coincidence that this would come into his life, you know, that he would get married to someone like this. Maybe really, like, it just makes sense in that, like, someone who would be open to, like, performing hypnosis and, like, who would kind of know about these subjects would be, you know, more in a position to sort of uncover these types of things. So,
maybe,
you know, that's another way of thinking about it. Like, hypnosis is, like, kind of, especially, like, I think, you know, maybe less so now. I don't know. It may be just as much now, but I feel like it's kind of, like, it's definitely, if you're into, like, UFOs and things like that, you know, hypnosis is a topic that comes up a lot because the whole aspect of, like, recovering memories and doing regression hypnosis, that's part of how, like, abductions are recalled, you know? So that was something that, like, you know, the fact that that'd be something that he would occur to him to, like, do, you know, even to deal with his wife being, like, bitchy at times, like, you know, like, or like staring off into space, like,
or
that,
snapping
you know,
at him.
It's by virtue of, like, so, you know.
So I'd have to say overall, like, good,
you know,
good work, Long John Nebel. You know, you broke a big story.
Read, like, in the course of reading about this, I read that he had, like, a long, heated, and, you know, it is, like, of course, you know, like, you would not disbelieve, like, if someone, like, tells you some of these horrible things, like, it's just, like, not appropriate to, like, disbelieve them, but, like, for what it's worth, like, you know, like, you know, especially with such conviction and, like, you know, what they've experienced, like, even if, like, it's a way of, like, processing, like, things that happened in one's childhood, like, you know, it's real to them, so, like, you know, but Long John Nebel, for his credit, he wasn't, like, a credulous person, you know, he was, like, not the type of, like, George Norrie type guy who was like, wow, and you're saying these sounds really come from hell. Like, his main posture was like, you know, that's, you know, not true. You know, like, like, he actually had a long fight on the air, which I'm interested to listen to because I just heard about it in reading about him with Gray Barker, who we mentioned in the Mothman episode, where he was, like, you know, taking him to task for, like, making up Men in Black stories and, you know, all sorts of things like that. So
yeah, he was a very provocative interviewer, apparently. Like, very good at getting,
like, butt
his
heads
guests
with
riled
people
up.
and not just take stuff, like, you know, at face value, or, you know, or just accept whatever thing.
You could almost call him, he sounds a little critically paranoid.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah.
Word. So
all right.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we can wrap up there. And
yeah, definitely. Yes. Rest in power to both of them.
Yeah, rest in power, Candy Jones. You exposed the machinations of the imperialists.
One of the few to slip through the fingers and, like, you know, let her tale be known, and, like, she lives today. You know, her memory lives on with you know, anyone who is on the tail of the BSK you know, lords. And
it is possible to escape. You know,
yeah,
it is possible.
She really did successfully escape. You know, so
yeah,
something.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, she was definitely, like, a groundbreaking whistleblower. So
yeah, impressive woman. Yeah. All right. Well, that'll do it for now. And
yeah, this ended up being long.
It did, but it was a good one.
You know,
it's a good one. Yeah, important stuff here.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
all
it
right.
is important. Yeah.
So yeah.
Little known story.
Yeah, it needs to be.
I did find,
more
like, a really, like, I found, like, this obscure, like, science channel, like, docu-series, like, kind of, like, that's, like, you know, vignettes about, like, twisted tales or something, and, like, one of them was about Candy Jones. It was not, like, the best treatment of the story, but you know, it had, like, a little dramatization of it.
Of course.
Wouldn't necessarily recommend that, but, you know, check out the book.
No, there's not much other media. Buy the book. The book is worth it. It's pretty solid, and I guess buy it before, you know, they erase it from existence.
Yeah, maybe it could be an investment because it will just be scrubbed from existence. And
exactly. So get your hands hands on it if you can.
Scoop it up while you can. Yeah.
And until next time, dear listeners, stay vigilant.
Peace.
Candy Jones don't feel right today. Sleeps in her clothes just like yesterday. I think nothing's gonna be alright. Candy Jones is not feeling right. Sleeps in the park on a Saturday night. She says, I think nothing's gonna be alright. I felt nothing since 1975. Won't you hit me, let me know I'm alive? I got the answers in my code. There's no stopping me now. And if you really wanna meet me inside my head, just be sure to close your eyes. Candy Jones heard what you said. Slept in the dark with the friends in her head. She said,